Today, we send to you our love and our deepest gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
So I don't think there's a better way to honor Mr. Griffin today than to have a symposium that focuses on the progress made on efforts to uncover the truth and seek accountability for what happened on 9/11. Exciting legal developments is our theme today. And the one person who has been in the trenches working long and hard to achieve them is Lawyers Committee Litigation Director Mick Harrison. Here's all you need to know about Mick. He sounds like a teacher, which he was before he got his law degree. But what has allowed him measures of success working the impossibly difficult 9/11 heat is that he's also a bulldog. He's a math whiz analyst and a finer points lawyer, all rolled into one. If there's a legal strategy or point of law or approach that can break through the walls of judicial bias and dismissal on technicalities so prevalent in court proceedings with respect to 9/11 cases, Mick Harrison will find it and will use it. That's why there are exciting new legal developments to report. So here he is with, quote, dispatches from the battlefield, where we've been and where we're going. The floor is yours, Mick.
Thank you, Christina. And before I start my presentation, let me make a modestly surprising announcement, which is that last year we had an award we issued to our late colleague, Ed Asner, which was the 9/11 Truth Advocate of the Year award, the first one we've ever issued as the Lawyers Committee. And this year, we would like to honor Dr. David Ray Griffin with that award. And I just wanted David to know that we appreciate his life's work and all that he has contributed to all of us. Probably more of us than he realizes have been inspired by his work. Some of us probably wouldn't be here at all if it were not for his work. So thank you again, David, and congratulations on having the second annual Lawyers Committee 9/11 Truth Advocate Award. So let me begin my presentation with a lawyerly announcement, which is a disclaimer that all of us speaking today will be speaking for ourselves on our own behalf, unless we actually literally say, this is a position taken by the Lawyers Committee. So please take what you hear from each of us as our opinions, and we may well have support for them in many cases from the Lawyers Committee as a whole, but we will be speaking for ourselves. So please keep that in mind. My second qualifier before I start the substance is that I was planning to do a workshop at the end of this presentation, the entire symposium. But with our technology that we've transitioned to, I don't think we can do the real-time interaction that I was hoping for. So we're still going to do Q&A, and feel free to put in your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of my presentation, and possibly some at the end of each presentation, but certainly at the end, we'll have a session for Q&A. And then I will put out an announcement later in a few days for another workshop, which we will hold, which will be a regular Zoom, or we can actually have you all on the screen and have live interaction. It may be a little more challenging to manage, but that'll be the price we pay for having that live interaction. So with that qualification, let me get into the dispatches from the battlefield, as it were. So we want to tell you where we've been in the legal actions, and then we want to tell you some areas we're thinking about going to. And most importantly, we want to hear from you, not only through your Q&A, but send us emails. And after you've listened to all the presentations and thought about it, let us know the direction you think we should be going. And we have a lot of options. We don't have the resources to follow each of those options. So we do want your feedback after you listen to where we've been and where are some options for where we can go. So the first case I want to talk about that the Lawyers Committee has been litigating It's one of the first ones we actually filed. It started in 2015. It's still being litigated 6 years later. This is an important Freedom of Information Act case. David Cole, who was our FOIA Freedom of Information Act coordinator with the Lawyers Committee for a number of years, is the plaintiff. I'm representing him. The Lawyers Committee is supporting us financially in that lawsuit. Now, the essence of that lawsuit is that David is trying to get, for the benefit of you all and us, the records that FEMA held at the time it published its building performance study. And many of you know that FEMA was the first government entity to do a study of the World Trade Center building collapses. And so they should have had a lot of very interesting data, photographs, video, interviews, lab analyses, field notes, go down the list, that went into their $1 million study, which they did publish, a very lengthy study. They had a lot of scientists and engineers involved in it. So David asked for all their records and all their data, and their first answer to him was, we don't have anything to give you. We don't have a single piece of data records to give you. They then clarified, after that non-credible answer, that they had transferred all of their records, meaning copies and originals, to another agency, NIST, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. And so that's why they didn't have anything to give David, because NIST had it all. So that was a pretty non-credible answer too, being in the computer age. You know, you don't give up your original email, you don't give up your original hard drive files or your backup files, but nonetheless, that's what they said. So David brought a lawsuit, which I am representing him in, and after, and only after he sued, did NIST provide about 3,700 pages of records regarding the building performance study data. They gave it back to FEMA, and FEMA gave it to David, but only after he sued them. Now, when David looked through those records, he discovered that the key records he was looking for, as you might guess, are the key records indicating the use of explosives and incendiaries at the Trade Center on 9/11. And there are some very important pieces of evidence on the steel, on the residual steel from the collapse of buildings, that some of which have been preserved by FEMA and NIST. And David wanted access to the photographs and the videos and the other records regarding that key evidence. Well, those key pieces of evidence were not, emphasized not, in the 3,700 pages of evidence produced, even after we sued. So we asked the judge for permission to do something which is rarely granted in FOIA cases, and that is to do discovery, to put some of the agency officials under oath in depositions, to force them to answer our written questions, interrogatories under oath, and to produce documents to us. And we did that. The judge granted it, and we did that. We finished that discovery a few weeks ago. We are now in the final stage of that case. We filed our summary judgment motion, our second one of the case, literally 2 days ago. And we expect a decision in a few months. And we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to win this case. And it has the potential to be a breakthrough kind of case. And the reason is, what we found out in our discovery was that there was literally a cover-up by both of these agencies, by FEMA and separately by NIST, to try to prevent releasing this key evidence. We now can prove that cover-up, in my view, based on what we found in discovery. And this is a rare moment in 9/11 litigation history that citizens are able to do this sort of proof. I'll give you the short version. When FEMA told the judge that they'd given all of their records to NIST, they basically told the judge that by way of trying to rationalize the fact that, you know, they didn't need to search their own records. But FOIA requires an agency to search its own records to produce responsive records. So FEMA said, you know, first, we don't have anything, and then second, we gave it all to NIST. It turns out from our discovery that the only thing that was transferred to NIST was not the computer records or the emails or the paper copies of NIST staff on the study. What it was the records of a contractor, Greenhorn and O'Mara only, which were transferred in a single transfer in May of 2002. So FEMA told David, when they first responded to him, that they had done a comprehensive search for responsive records. Now that we've done discovery, what we know is that FEMA did no search for responsive records. They didn't search their emails. They didn't search their computers. They didn't search their paper copies. And the judge is learning this for the first time through our discovery. And so is the public. So the other side of this case is the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They also told the judge that they had done a thorough search for our records. But by the time our discovery was done, it turns out they had done an intentionally limited search. And by that, I mean an engineer at NIST directed the staff person who was supposed to go look for all the responsive records for David's FOIA. They told that staff person to go to the NIST World Trade Center computer database, which is in fact pretty useful database with a lot of records in it, but not to search it generally for all responsive records about the building performance study, but instead to take a single inventory of a particular list of documents, a 2-page list, which was a list of those Greenhorn and O'Mara documents transferred in May 2002, go find those particular documents only and stop. And don't do any more search for any other records. Now, we can prove, and we have submitted it to the judge, that there was a second later transfer of building performance study records in January 2003 by a different contractor. And it had a lot of the videos and photographs that we suspect are the key missing ones. So stay tuned for how this case turns out. We'll keep you posted. But there is a real possibility we're going to get those videos and photographs and other records on those key steel samples. And if we do, we may add to the already dispositive set of evidence that you will see in our grand jury petition, which shows that explosives, in fact, were used and incendiaries at the Trade Center on 9/11, sorry to say, which resulted in so many deaths from the collapse of those buildings. So the second case I want to tell you about in terms of where we've been, we did sue the FBI in federal court in DC. Some of you may still not know that there was a second 9/11 Commission study, and this was the 9/11 Review Commission, started in 2013, went through 2015, chaired by Ed Meese. And Congress had asked the FBI, basically directed the FBI, to look at all 9/11 evidence, not just the evidence that the original 9/11 Commission had evaluated. A lot of folks don't realize Congress directed that. What we got, unfortunately, from the FBI and the new commission was a whitewash, and they didn't look at the demolition evidence at all. So, and several other categories of evidence we pointed out in our lawsuit. So we sued to force the FBI to do what Congress had mandated. The district court, unfortunately, dismissed our case for lack of legal standing. We'll hear a little more about that as we go through the day. And the court wasn't saying we were wrong. The court was just saying that we don't have a right to complain to the court. And, we had the lawyers committee as a plaintiff. We had architects and engineers as a plaintiff. We had a 9/11 family member as a plaintiff. So that was a disturbing result. We appealed to the DC Circuit, and the DC Circuit Court of Appeals advised us that they agreed with the district court that we didn't have standing. And this was a case you can learn more about on our website. But the short version is we had a 3-judge panel. One of those judges turned out to be Merrick Garland, who was soon to become the Attorney General of the United States. And he was on the panel deciding our case, in which we were suing the Department of Justice and the FBI. At a time he was being considered become the head of that agency. So that caused us some concern. We asked for a disclosure of certain facts regarding Judge Garland's involvement and what he knew when about his appointment. Unfortunately, we did not get that disclosure. So that was a twist. We did petition the U.S. Supreme Court on that case, which was denied, I'm sorry to report. However, we do have a fix for that problem, because in that case, Congress had not put the requirements for the public report from the new commission into the wording of the statute. They'd only put it in legislative history. Congress could fix that for us if they want, and we might still get a new 9/11 Commission report that actually means something. We'll keep you updated on that. We had another FOIA lawsuit that we brought trying to get interviews from NIST, from the World Trade Center on 9/11. Short version of that case is that We did not lose it on standing. We did lose it. Something to keep in mind is citizens always have standing to bring a Freedom of Information Act case. So there will be no standing obstacle in those types of cases. The government asserted late in the game, when I say late in the game, I mean after we had sued them, a legal defense and exemption under FOIA that did not even exist at the time we filed the lawsuit. And that was on a key interview by a key witness who was at Building 7 on 9/11. And the court basically said that it had discretion to allow the agency to add that statutory defense late. And that defense was simply that the head of the agency had declared that particular interview to fall within a group of records that might endanger public safety if it were released. And so, you know, if the case had been decided in the posture when we filed our suit, we probably would have won that. But the judge allowed the agency to adjust its defense after the fact. We did another Freedom of Information Act case. These are all three for David Cole regarding the Building 7 collapse, which most of you know. Building 7 was the third steel framed high rise to collapse on 9/11. It was not, emphasized, not hit by an airplane. And it's been the subject of a lot of study by Richard Gage and his colleagues at Architects and Engineers, his former colleagues there, a lot of other scientists, engineers, and architects. So we wanted the key data about column 79, which is where NIST says the collapse started under their fire-induced collapse theory. Make a long story short, they've kept that information secret. They continue to keep it secret. And the court decided we were not entitled to it, again, based on an exemption that has to do with protecting the public from a danger that might be created by the release of the data. But that exemption has an exception, which is that the exemption doesn't apply when the information sought has to do with the collapse of the building, meaning the reason for the collapse. And all David was seeking was, you know, the records regarding the collapse. So that data should have been released as well. NIST continues to hold its computer modeling, explaining its view that fire caused this collapse, continues to hold it secret. It's a black box. It has not been able to be examined by independent scientists. That is also the subject of a new case by Architects and Engineers. And they're probably going to be talking about that as well. I'm representing AE in that case. So one of our more interesting cases, and Christina, you'll have to remind me when we get close to time, the Second Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals recently decided a case that we started with the U.S. Attorney and the special grand jury, federal grand jury in New York. We filed a petition there, giving them all of our evidence on demolition, virtually all. And turns out the U.S. Attorney refused to deliver that evidence in our petition to the grand jury. We sued in the district court. The district court unfortunately decided again that we didn't have standing. And we had family members who had lost loved ones in 9/11 as plaintiffs. We had first responders as plaintiffs. We had nonprofits whose business is 9/11 Truth as plaintiffs. And again, we were shut out. The court didn't say we were wrong about the U.S. Attorney's duty to give our evidence to the grand jury. The court just said we didn't have a right to complain to the court about it. And we appealed that to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which unfortunately agreed with the district court again. That standing kept us from suing. There's a twist in this case that's even more disturbing than the prior ones. And that is we had a First Amendment claim in this case. What we basically said was, look, we're petitioning the grand jury under the First Amendment, the right to petition for redress. Our petition is addressed to the grand jury, not just to the U.S. Attorney. And so the U.S. Attorney effectively was obstructing the delivery of a First Amendment petition to another government entity, the grand jury. And there's a lot of federal case law from the U.S. Supreme Court on down, which says that not only an obstruction of a First Amendment right, but even the chilling of the exercise of such a right gives the person who was attempting to use the right standing to sue. And the Second Circuit decided otherwise in this context. And they seem to be saying there's no right to petition a grand jury at all, directly or indirectly, even through a U.S. Attorney, which is really going to change the constitutional nature and independence of the grand jury for the worse. So we are in the process of deciding how to respond to that decision. We are contemplating going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We have other options, including going back for rehearing with the Second Circuit. And if you have thoughts on how we proceed on that, that's one of the, where do we go from here questions. We haven't given up on the grand jury petition idea. So even if we don't go to the U.S. Supreme Court or back to the Second Circuit, we do have options of going to state courts in New York and federal courts in other jurisdictions. So stay tuned for more news on how we proceed on that. There is a new lawsuit that we're about to file against the FBI for records related to what the FBI calls its major bombing cases. You may wonder why a 9/11 group is asking the FBI about major bombing cases. And the answer is, within that set of records, the FBI includes the World Trade Center incident on 9/11 and the Pentagon incident on 9/11. And some of you may remember that the FBI called its investigation of 9/11 initially for some months. They called it Pent Bomb because they were treating it as a bombing case, and for some good reason. So we learned, must have been a year or so ago, the FBI intended to take this sort of massive set of photographs and other records of its major bombing cases and send them to the National Archives. And so we asked the FBI to give us all of those records, a copy of all those records under FOIA. And the FBI came back and said, okay, we'll give them to you, but you're going to have to give us $2,000 or so to pay for the cost. And we said, okay, we'll give you the cost of those records. Please produce them. And they came back, perhaps being surprised that we were willing to pay that cost, and said, sorry, we can't give you anything because those records are actually part of an ongoing investigation. They're still law enforcement sensitive. And so we can't give you basically a single page of them. So that lawsuit may be filed tomorrow. It might be filed the next day. It's coming soon to the U.S. District Court in D.C. Now, we've done a number of other things, which I won't belabor. And Christina, are you watching my time?
You've got about a minute, but we do have some extra time, so you can go over a
Okay.
little bit.
Okay. So is this for my first 20 minutes or for my Q&A part as well?
Your first 20 minutes.
So we're not too bad. So we have been doing investigations that underlie our litigation. And I think you all know we did the petition to Congress on anthrax. We did the petition, you may not know, to a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. on the anthrax attacks. You'll be hearing more about that. Those cases may go to litigation sooner than later, or those petitions. We did some other FOIA work, too many really to talk about, but when David Meiswinkle, Attorney Meiswinkle, was working with us, he initiated a Pennsylvania request, state records request that got us access to a lot of the Shanksville records from the coroner's office. And we also did, through David's efforts, a state police of New Jersey request related to the High Fivers, the group of folks who described themselves as Israelis who were arrested celebrating the attacks, after celebrating the attacks, and were actually held and interviewed by the FBI for a number of months until they were released, in my view, prematurely after what appears to be intervention by the State Department or the CIA. So we anticipate, in terms of where we go from here, doing an expanded Freedom of Information Act campaign. And we're going to be doing more work beyond the Trade Center and expanding our investigative work into issues of government cover-up on 9/11, issues that relate to Shanksville, issues relate to the Pentagon. And if you have ideas for us where we could do a Freedom of Information request in any of these areas, including the big ultimate question, which is, who done it? We are going to be looking at the who done it aspect in our investigation as well. Now, one of the big questions we want you all to be thinking about and giving us your feedback on it when you can, and you can always email us through our website, or you could put in a Q&A here. There is a type of lawsuit that we haven't brought yet. We've been contemplating. It takes more resources than we currently have. There's a big lawsuit against the Saudis by big law firms on behalf of many 9/11 family members. Well, this would be similar in scope to that. It's a lawsuit that focuses on the allegation of government cover-up. And there's a line of cases from the U.S. Supreme Court down through the courts of appeals that recognizes a citizen's right to bring it's essentially a First Amendment type of lawsuit to complain of a government cover-up that has prevented a citizen who's been harmed by some wrongdoing from bringing a lawsuit against the original wrongdoer. So the context here, if you think about the 9/11 family members or the first responders, all of whom have suffered, horrendous losses from the 9/11 attacks generally, but also the demolition of the Trade Center building specifically. So we are contemplating bringing a federal lawsuit to prove not only that there was the use of explosives and incendiaries on 9/11 that killed so many of those first responders and the tenants of the buildings, harming so many families, but also that the government and some of its agencies and officials have engaged in a cover-up that has prevented the victims from getting to the truth of what happened to their loved ones and has delayed their ability to go into court and get money damages or other relief against the wrongdoers who caused them those losses. So it's an interesting legal theory. It would allow essentially the issue of cover-up to be proven up as an element of the case. The fact that we allege cover-up wouldn't be a basis for dismissing the case. It would be something we would actually have to properly allege and then do discovery on and prove up. So that is one of the more ambitious options we're contemplating. Now, we're also, as I mentioned, contemplating going to the U.S. Supreme Court on that Second Circuit case regarding standing and the grand jury and the First Amendment. We are contemplating more grand jury petitions, both state and other federal jurisdictions. We are contemplating efforts with Congress, follow-ups on the anthrax attacks and our petitions, also on the Trade Center demolition evidence, and on an issue that's getting some public attention from others these days, including some members of Congress, and that is the ongoing harm to the first responders and the residents who got exposed to the toxic dust from the Trade Center. Folks continue to become ill and die from those horrible exposures. And the demolition issue is not unrelated to all of those illnesses and deaths. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence. This is sort of a crude way to put it, but there's a lot of evidence of the use of the explosives and incendiaries, not only still in the dust, but some of that evidence resides in the bodies of the victims. So we are going to look at the Pentagon and Shanksville as our resources allow. And I am contemplating, and others, I invite my colleagues to consider this. I haven't really talked this through with them, so I'm definitely speaking for myself here on this one. I'm contemplating, how would I put this, making the legal resources of the Lawyers Committee or myself or both more available to the broader 9/11 community rather than doing sort of Lawyers Committee focused actions only. I've done a couple trial balloons in that direction. One is I'm representing Jean Laratonda on a FOIA on the Pentagon, which you'll be hearing more about for a lot of the video. And then I'm also, as most of you probably know, representing architects and engineers in their lawsuit in federal court on the Information Quality Act petition they filed in the appeal. But I would like you all to think about, is there a role for us in working with you more directly, with more of you as our clients? We haven't turned ourselves into a law firm per se, but that doesn't mean some of us as lawyers and investigators even cannot be of direct assistance to you in your advocacy. I want you to be thinking about that. So Christina, do we have any Q&A time?
I would say maybe you can take, let me see. Yeah, take a few minutes because it's 4:31 and we have all of Chris Joya's time. Unfortunately, he was unable to make it.
Okay, so will someone want to feed me a question or should I look at the Q&As?
I have been collecting these. There's Bill 4HD10 that has asked several questions. One is, what is the status of our request for a grand jury? What could be worse than the way the courts deny the rights of citizens to petition grand juries? And have the photos from the Pentagon ever been released?
Those are pretty good questions. I've addressed them in part. The status of the grand jury request, there's actually a little sliver of hope that Barbara always reminds me that our petition might have actually found its way into the hands of the federal grand jury in New York. The government has sort of talked around that very carefully in their court filings, but for the most part, the government seems to be saying they may have told the grand jury that we reported the crime, but they probably didn't tell the grand jury much else, including not handing them the evidence or our petition. So we're either going to have to go to the Supreme Court and get an order requiring the delivery of that petition to the grand jury, or we're going to have to go to a federal judge, which we are contemplating, and asking the judge to have that petition delivered to the grand jury, or we'll have to try another route, like a state court. So those are some of the options on the grand jury. And then Ellen, remind me of one of his other questions.
Have the photos from the Pentagon ever been released?
Okay, many of them, and particularly videos, not. And that's the focus of the FOIA request I just recently filed for Dean Laratonda and Sandra Gelmy. And I don't know what their defense is going to be this time around. We refined this request based on an earlier response they gave to an earlier FOIA, and they specifically identified that they were holding at least 100 videos that apparently had never been released. But as far as I know, there is no FOIA exemption that would justify their withholding those videos. So stay tuned for that one. I think we're going to make progress on that one. So do you want to do maybe another person's question?
I've got a whole bunch of them here.
Okay, go ahead.
Why don't I read them and you can pick the one that
Okay.
answer the most. Brian Wixon asks, has there been a deep investigation into the profiteers of the put options on the stock market?
Okay, hold right there. I've got to take that.
All right.
So that is an ongoing area of inquiry. I did not go into detail on what we might be looking at if we go into the cover-up issues, but the put options are one of the areas that would fall into our cover-up inquiries. And the reason that is, as the questioner may know, is that the original 9/11 Commission actually briefly examined the put options. For those who don't know, there were folks who actually placed what amount to bets through stock options just prior to 9/11, that certain companies' stocks would fall. And that included the airlines involved in the attacks, some of the offices that were hardest hit in the World Trade Center buildings. And so it certainly appeared that someone had advanced knowledge of those attacks. And when the 9/11 Commission looked at those put options, they said, well, we looked at them and the people that made the put options were identified and they did not have any connections to Al-Qaeda. So we decided no further inquiry was required. Well, we haven't decided that no further inquiry is required. The fact that Al-Qaeda didn't make those put options for us is even more reason to get to the bottom of them. So if we have time, I'll take another question.
Pat G, there's a number of questions in the Q&A, which hopefully you'll look at and answer in writing. But Pat G asks, I have asked this before of the 9/11 truth groups. Is it possible to sue Christine Todd Whitman for the irreparable damage and death she's caused to our first responders? Her air is safe to breathe declaration was negligent homicide.
Well, that is an important and delicate question. I actually represented a senior scientist at EPA who blew the whistle on the toxic World Trade Center dust to the FBI and to Congress and others, and she was fired. And with the nonprofit Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, I represented her and we got her job back. She's still working at the EPA, but we learned in the process that there was an effort to gag her and her disclosures about how dangerous that dust was and the failures to warn the first responders. That includes the time period that the questioner is asking about. when Miss Whitman was being, I think, misinformed by the people advising her as to how safe or dangerous the air was. I would tend to agree that the agency did not warn the first responders properly, and that people became exposed and ill, and some died because of the lack of adequate warnings. Whether, I mean, that type of lawsuit might fall within the realm of the type of lawsuit I mentioned, which is actually the Jennifer Harbury type of case. Jennifer Harbury is the one who sort of broke the ground on this type of lawsuit I mentioned, the First Amendment right of access to the courts about government cover-ups. You know, there was a government cover-up of the dangers of this dust, and it did cause harm. So it's a very important question. We may well be looking at it, and I encourage others to look at it as well. Another question?
I think that
I think this should be our last
Last
question.
one. Okay. One more? Good, just one more, Ellen.
well, Pat Lampkin wrote, have you realized that the defense of the conspirators was planned carefully in advance by Wachtell Lipton?
The answer is no to the question as it was worded, but I will say that there's a lot of evidence that the crimes of 9/11 were planned well in advance. And I think that includes, to some extent, backup plans and what to do if something goes wrong, and how to deal with the cover-up. The whole anthrax thing, which Barbara will get into to some extent, may be a prime example of a backup plan where something did go wrong. Keep in mind, Building 7 came down at 5 o'clock, way later in the day. No plane had hit it, came down in broad daylight. That is unlikely to have been planned. And it may be a plane was intended to arrive there and did not make it. It may be a plane was intended to get to Washington, D.C. and didn't make it. We all know Flight 93 was shot down. There were other planes that may have been planned to have been involved. So
There are a couple of really good questions here.
yeah, we'll have to do them at the end. Don't
Okay.
lose them.
All right.
Christina's going to go to the next speaker, but I appreciate your patience.
So now we're going to go from the courtroom to the crime scene without forensic evidence, without the technical expertise to examine that evidence and come to sound conclusions about what it shows. An investigation can be fatally hamstrung by having to resort to weaker circumstantial evidence alone. Fortunately for the 9/11 movement, that is not the case. And one man in particular is responsible for that. Richard Gage is one of the towering figures of the 9/11 movement because he founded Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, the single most important institution ever organized to look at the technical evidence aspects of what happened on 9/11. For this alone, the debt of gratitude owed to this man is enormous. But Richard isn't done yet, not by a long shot. Anyone who knows him knows that he's indefatigable. And for a guy who's been pushing so hard on a tough issue like 9/11 for so long, he's actually a very upbeat person. Now a member of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry Board of Directors, as well as the committee's technical director, he continues to break new ground. He's producing an exciting new historic documentary series titled 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, which he's going to talk to you about today. Take it away, Richard.
You're on mute, Richard.
I can't hear you. Hold on. He needs.
Oh, sorry, that's on my end. Thank you so much, Christina. I'm excited to be here with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiring. Have a great honor to have been brought on board, literally. And hang on one second, there we go. Brought on board to bring to bear the work over the last 17 years in assembling the evidence for the explosive destruction of the Twin Towers on 9/11. This work has revolutionized my life, having been launched into this. It turns out to be a career. Though I loved architecture, I had to do something about this lie that we've been handed. And so now, after 17 years, RichardGage911.org is launched along with my wife, Gail. We have engaged in interviewing experts in and around the 9/11 truth movement, 75 podcasts in the last year. It's woken me up because I'm hearing evidence, for instance, about other false flag operations, like we've been engaged in the last 2 years, for instance. And so I've been asked to speak around the country on topics outside of the World Trade Center. And it's my awareness has grown immeasurably. My respect for the perpetrators of 9/11 who have pulled off the most spectacular crime of the century. They've been exceeded now in the last 2 years. So we have to focus on 9/11 yet again to bring the truth about that crime to those millions around the world who are opening up now to truth. The ground is fertile for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry to take the evidence to court, because guess what? Grand jurors are people too. They have hearts, they have minds, they know when they're being deceived. And so, with respect to the grand jury, I'm honored to be in the position, along with Mick Harrison, to bring to the grand jury directly in the form of a supplement to the original grand jury petition, which we're fighting in court to make sure that the grand jury actually gets it. And we may go all the way to the Supreme Court to ensure that victory. We will be featured in this film, myself and experts like Eric Lawyer, who's with us today, to bring this evidence to bear in the largest compilation of the evidence ever brought into a documentary, in this case, a film series, 9/11 crime scene to courtroom. And Mick will be explaining to the grand jury their obligations, their duties, who they might subpoena to get more information, how they might provide, who they might talk to, who's material witnesses. What is evidence, and what is each particular component of evidence that they'll be reviewing, and what are their opportunities relative to it? This is, as Mick notes, dispositive evidence, overwhelming, irrefutable evidence. We believe that if this evidence, bringing the 60 exhibits alive in the form of a film series, which we're in production now of, and will be shooting formally in Washington, D.C. in October. So this is an opportunity for everybody to get involved and co-produce. You can learn more at Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, LC, FOR 911.org. The opportunity for this entire symposium today, in fact, is to fund the Lawyers Committee. Why? The Lawyers Committee is the tip of the spear of the 9/11 truth movement. And I am giving everything I got to make sure that it is successful with these cases that Mick has highlighted and the forthcoming cases and the opportunity to go to the Supreme Court. We have to succeed. We have to fund this work. And believe me, I'm on the inside of this organization as a board member, and I know that they're pinching pennies to make it work. I know that Mick may have to go out and seek other alternative incomes, which would keep him from doing the work that we have to have him in particular doing in the 9/11 Truth Movement. It's absolutely essential. There's no other alternative. We've been working 17 years presenting evidence to governments, academicians, universities, the mainstream media, everywhere we can. I've given more than 650 interviews on the radio where I always talk about Building 7 and its free fall symmetrical collapse into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. And I show it to people, and everybody who sees that building coming down, well, maybe 99.9% agrees, oh my God, that's a controlled demolition. When did that happen? Because we show architects and engineers at conferences. They all acknowledge that it's a controlled demolition, which puts them in a very difficult spot, right? Well, if that's a controlled demolition, and if it happened on 9/11, then should I be open to the possibility that the Twin Towers could also have been controlled demolitions? Oh my God, what would that mean? We're in the position, the business of putting people in an extremely difficult psychological position with themselves. They come face to face with reality, just like I did in 2006, March 29, when I heard David Ray Griffin, who we are honoring today because he's let the 9/11 Truth Movement know that he only has a couple of months left with us. And that's why we're honoring his work tomorrow at the September 11th event, the 9/11 Truth Film Festival, starting at 10 a.m. at the website richardgage911.org. And we're honoring him and dedicating this symposium today to his honor, to his work and his life. So we can convince people that Building 7 came down, and we've been doing it for 17 years, but has that been enough? No. We've got to get victory in the court system. We've tried everything else. Believe me, Mick is practically pro bono with the work he's doing. He's on subsistence level. We need more Micks. While this symposium is a fundraiser, and we hope to raise $10,000, that will keep this work going for a little while because Mick has other consultants that he has to pay. There's a staff at Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Some of us are volunteers. Most of us are. But we've got to have more lawyers doing more work that Mick is doing and can oversee. So we're really looking for $100,000 to make this organization the incredible success that it could be on behalf of the 9/11 family members, on behalf of the 9/11 Truth Movement, on behalf of people all around the world who were so badly scammed and hurt and killed and murdered on and after 9/11. So if you care about the truth about 9/11, and I'm talking about more than 100 people that are with us today, if you care, and the people that are watching on the YouTube live stream, and the people who have yet to watch, we're reaching thousands. So if you can at least send the link to this live stream, especially the YouTube link, to everybody that you know, so that A, they can get the information, B, they can know that there's a Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, C, they have the opportunity to donate. There are people out there who have the funds to do the job that need help us do the job here at LC911. That has to be done. We don't have a choice. As I mentioned, the ground is fertile now for 9/11 truth. And you're looking here at this organization, the tip of the spear that could puncture the hull of the ship of 9/11 truth denial. Don't pass up this opportunity. Look at your resources and ask yourself a very serious question in concert with your conscience. How can I help? And I assure you, with regard to 9/11 truth, this is the best way. Click the donate button at LC for 9/11. That's LCFOR911.org. Thanks, everybody.
So thank you, Richard, for your presentation. Do you have a presentation that you're going to make with a slide presentation?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a very emphatic and very necessary plea that you just made on behalf of the Lawyers Committee, and all of us who are part of it appreciate it very much, and appreciate your hard work very much.
Thank you,
So,
Christina.
We're going to move on to our next speaker, a very special individual, because for him, searching for the truth at the core of 9/11 it's a spiritual matter, a matter for deep reflection about what it means and what positive actions can be taken to make a difference after such a soul-racking tragedy, especially in service of those who sacrificed their own lives to save others in the wake of 9/11. Firefighters were, of course, on the front lines of recovery efforts, and they have paid high prices for it, including slow, painful deaths resulting from breathing in toxic materials at the wreckage sites. Eric Lawyer is a retired firefighter from the Seattle Fire Department with 25 years of emergency services experience. He founded Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and the Protecting All Protectors Alliance, or PAPA, an organization dedicated to protecting and supporting those who are committed to protecting people and life, and to building better models that create the conditions for people to live and thrive together. PAPA is currently working on developing a better model for government investigations of major incidents like 9/11, so that first responders, as protectors, receive the accurate information they need to be more effective at their jobs and to protect themselves. His topic today is, quote, "Never again." Welcome, Mr. Lawyer.
Thank you, Christina. And it's an honor to be here. And thank you to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. Like Richard said, they're really the tip of the spear. It's taken 21 years, and we're still having to break through the armor, I guess you could say, of our current system. So I just want to make sure, are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yes.
We
Yes,
hear-
okay, great. So it's an honor to be here. And it's an honor to be back into the 9/11 truth movement, I'd say. I had to take several years off to kind of deal with my own PTSD from different things. But before that started, I just want to honor Richard and his presentation, and also, basically helping people see that we need to support the groups that have the greatest opportunity to create change. And that's the Lawyers Committee, with so many different, I'd say, irons in the fire. And they've been at this for a long time. And I believe things are starting to shift. So it feels like now's the time where those of us who've kind of been on the edges of the truth movement, it's time to come back. And I'd say with a new approach. So I do want to honor Richard, who originally got me in, you could say, to the 9/11 truth movement, because when I saw his work with architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, at that point, I couldn't deny what I saw. For years, I tried to avoid it. I pretended like the official story was true. And if I considered even going into what might have happened on 9/11, how would I say it? I realized my whole world was shattered, because the brotherhood to me, the brotherhood of the fire service, at that point, I'd already been in the emergency services, I think, for 13 or 14 years when 9/11 happened. And that was who I was. And so to consider that these brothers might have been killed by something other than the terrorists we were told, just would shatter my entire existence. And so I wasn't willing to go there. And I'd say the scientific and really methodical approach that Richard's taken, and how he stayed in this for years, like you guys honored him for being, the powerhouse here. He's been methodical. He's kept the same message going. He's helped us see that science doesn't back this up. And so that really landed in me. And once I let it in, it was like my whole world shifted. So from there, I went all in, you could say, with 9/11 truth. And where I was really in the phase where I wanted revenge more than anything, because whoever was responsible, what I saw as something other than what we were told, I knew that whoever was responsible had killed 343 of my brothers. And I wanted revenge, to be honest. That's where I was at. And so my own anger, my own, I'd say, trauma kind of fueled me to keep going after a quote them, an enemy, someone else outside of me, someone outside of my brotherhood. And with that, it took a lot of energy, and it really drained me. And one thing shifted to another. And I finally had my life, I'd say, I got lost in the darkness of the corruption and the betrayal that I felt. And I wasn't able to continue. So it became clear when a man came into my life that helped me see. He said, if you really want to change the world, you've got to start with yourself first. And he helped me see that the energy, the message I was putting out was creating more fear and division. And I saw that in my family and my friends and the brotherhood. So back then in 2008 is when I started with Richard Gage and founded Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, with his support and the support of many others. And from that place, we did several presentations, made some documentaries, and I became a target, you could say, for firefighters around the world, those who didn't want to consider it also. So with that, I would just say I was threatened, a lot of anger, a lot of things came to me. This is what really broke my heart. So here on one hand, I feel like I'm trying to raise the alarm, you could say, like I know so many of us, the 9/11 Truth Movement feel. And on the other hand, I'm being attacked for doing that very thing. What I wasn't able to see at that time was the energy I was raising the alarm with. And the metaphor I use is like a firefighter showing up at a major apartment building fire. And if we show up and we just keep screaming, fire, 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 and we're saying there's an arsonist, 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 fire, 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 we create a lot more, we'll say, chaos at that fire and a lot more fear. If we're able to show up and alert that, hey, your building's on fire, and then give clear direction on where we need to go from here. So kind of like what Mick's starting with is, where do we go from here? Clear direction. What do we support next? So when we show up that way and we're calm, we're well-trained, and I just saw the text there. And we start directing people, not out of a place of fear and let's punish these people, but hey, our systems, if we look at it as an institution, our social systems, our justice systems, economic systems, they're all metaphorically burning. Whether it was burning by an arsonist or not, doesn't really matter at this point. What matters is how do we extinguish this? And then how do we look at this with more like an investigation would, an authentic one, not like what we've had, but look at not just the fight like 9/11 investigation, but look at how have our systems been built? How do we make them better? How do we change this? And how do we take that energy, that fuel that I have of, what used to be anger and now it's more passion? How do we fuel that as a collective and start putting our energy towards those new solutions that prevent these types of events from happening? So that was kind of where I went, was I had to do my own internal, I'd say, PTSD healing work. And it's led to a lot more of an open perspective of what's actually happening here, and more where I can calmly assess things and go, okay, what's really the underlying brokenness here? And so this, what was it, past July, I think it was maybe in June, whatever it was, several months ago, it was Boston 9/11 Truth that had noticed that the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, was having a conference in Boston, so right where they were. So they reached out to Richard Gage, and they also invited me back into the 9/11 Truth movement. And I hadn't been in it for really active. I hadn't been in it for 12 years it's been. So I'm coming back with a new approach, and that's what I want to share. It's not just my approach, it's Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and Papa's approach. So what happened when Boston 9/11 Truth invited us, we started talking, and one thing led to another. And what we realized was we need a protection alliance. So PAPA stands for Protecting All Protectors Alliance. Part of what I saw by raising the flag, you could say, was I did have death threats. I had threats from firefighters. I had threats from people that wouldn't identify themselves. So it was a very terrifying place to be. And there's still that energy out there. There's still people, I'd say, that are kind of stuck in the us versus them, that don't want to see some of these things come to light. And I get it. So what became clear was, for us to move forward more effectively, we need to unify with a supportive protection agency or alliance. And so that's really the foundational element of PAPA. So we worked through that and kind of worked as a team. Things became more clear. We ended up going to the National Fire Protection Association conference in Boston, and we presented as PAPA. We didn't come with a 9/11 approach, but we did highlight World Trade Center Tower 7. And now the Protection Association, the National Fire Protection Association, they're the ones who set the national standards. So setting the national standards, that's what we've highlighted in Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, that the fire investigation for World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 did not follow national standards, not even the most basic. They violated criminal evidence laws and all kinds of things. So we approached NFPA, the people there that are the ones who kind of set the standards, and we'd say building protection, firefighters, academies, all those it's usually the people that are the leadership teams that come to this conference. And we presented, Richard Gage was there. And what we shared with them was, we basically Tower 7, and just presented that. And most people hadn't heard of it. So I'll just sum up PAPA it's still in its infancy, and we're open to support, but it's still, and you can go to Protecting All. So it's protectingall.org is our website. And what our approach is that's kind of emerging is we are building relationships with people on the inside of certain institutions. One would be the NFPA, and also some insurance company, lobbyist groups and different things that were there that we made contacts with. So what we're considering as a group is, what would it look like to have a new type of an investigative or an inquiry oversight body that's not government controlled? So I just want to leave it at that PAPA's in its infancy. We're building trusted relationships. We're not being public about what's happening for obvious reasons, to protect these relationships. Now that was PAPA, that was Boston 9/11 Truth that catalyzed that. And overall, it was tremendously effective. The amount of people that came to our booth was overwhelming compared to any other 9/11 stuff we'd done. So I just want to say that's really positive of what's unfolding, and there'll be more to come in this next year. And then from there, what happened next was it became clear we needed to continue, especially a message for this 9/11, for the 21-year anniversary. And it became clear it wasn't coming through PAPA. It's kind of a new organization, and that's not its role. So I'll just say, in divine timing, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth is rising again. So there's a man named Paul Keeley, who's been a brother of mine for years on the back end, keeping just our website up and the message going. And what Paul's really going to become well known for, I'd say, is the documentary called Calling Out Bravo 7. So during my internal time, Paul worked, it's unbelievable what this man was able to bring together. And the documentary is called Calling Out Bravo 7. I'm going to share some clip here. And what this documentary did for myself and many others, for myself, it kind of inspired me again. Like, hey, here's an approach that's really grounded and helps people see without all the fear and everything else. But it helps firefighters especially wake up to what happened on 9/11. And so when, where would I go with this? There was another captain, I'm not going to name him, just there's another captain that was with us in Boston. So Paul, this captain, and myself were talking about where do we go from here. And what came through was Paul's idea was a video approach where it's like we have firefighters just record themselves in a video to take a stand that the best way to honor these fallen firefighters from 9/11 is not just to say never forget and ignore the evidence, ignore any possible, let's say, corruption or anything like that. That to us is not honoring. That's burying our head. So it's hard to go here. And so speaking to firefighters, we get it. And so these videos are kind of here as a way to show there's more of us coming on. And I want to share this clip now and for you to see, we literally just did this in the last few days and already I'd say a lot of firefighters want to join this. So I'm just going to play this clip here so you can see the message we're saying. And
Make sure you turn the sound on, Eric.
yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So for those of you, and I'll share the link at the end, but we've created a new link called Brotherhood Invitation. So it's www.brotherhoodinvitation.com. And that's, people have asked me for years, what can we share with firefighters? We're going to create more materials and things like that. But what we're doing here is just getting it started. So if they click Brotherhood Invitation, it takes them to this page, and it's just a letter to other firefighters from us. And then this is the video. And let me know, do you still see it?
Yes.
Can you hear it?
Hi, my name is John Yeager.
Turn it up.
I think you didn't turn on the video, the sound when you shared the screen. There's a little thing you have to go on out and then come back in again.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
Down on the bottom left, when you click on share screen, on the bottom left, there's a thing that says turn on video and maximize.
Okay.
Something like that anyway. I
Share.
can't see it.
Yeah, lower left corner. Share audio, the checkbox.
Oh, there we go. Share sound. Perfect.
And there's a
Optimize.
maximize, optimize, right?
Okay. Okay. Can you see? Let's see. Can you hear
I'm a
that?
firefighter.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Michael Summer. I'm a firefighter in the UK and I have been for over 20 years.
Hi, my name is John Yeager. I was a professional firefighter in the United States with 27 years of service.
My name is Grant Morrow and I'm a firefighter in the UK Fire Service and have been for the last 24 years.
My name is Tony Robbins. I am a professional firefighter in the United States with 25 years of service.
My name is Eric Lawyer, and I'm a retired professional firefighter from the USA.
My name's Kenny. I've been a firefighter in the UK Fire Service for 21 years.
My name is Paul Cayley. I'm a professional firefighter in the UK.
Hi, my name's Josh, and I've been a firefighter in the United Kingdom for over 8 years.
My name is Rich Bath. I'm a retired firefighter from the United States.
My name is Stuart Harrison. I'm a retired firefighter in the UK.
My name's Andy Loss. I am a UK firefighter and have been for the last 13 years.
My name is Simon Wall and I'm a retired UK firefighter with over 30 years service.
My name is Christopher Joya. I'm a former fire commissioner and ex-chief with the Franklin Square Munson Fire Department in New York with 35 years of active service.
Hi, I'm Captain Raul Angulo.
I'm a 38-year line veteran of the Seattle Fire Department and Captain Emeritus of Ladder Company 6 and Engine Company 33. This year marks the 21st anniversary of September 11th. And to commemorate this event, I'm urging all my professional colleagues to watch Calling Out Bravo 7. The Calling Out Bravo 7 documentary is a game changer and opened my eyes and caused me to question the whole narrative. For the 343, never forget, but to be misled, never again.
Never forget 9/11. We've been misled, but never again.
Never forget, but misled, never again.
Never forget, absolutely. But misled, never again.
Never forget, but misled, never again.
Never forget, but misled, never again.
So you get the idea. And you were able to hear that, correct?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. So that gives you an idea. And this has just been in a few days, literally, and we're finishing up today. That's why I was a little bit late coming on. And what we see happening here is the potential for this to go, to spread more. And what our hope is we can become a voice for the people and for the work that Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth and Richard and others, when it's, I'd say, moments where we really need to galvanize and come together as a unified team, where the intention here is for us to be able to get that message out and help bring more support, basically. So that's where we're at right now with this never forget, never again. And I'm just going to pause for a second. So yeah. I want to address something that for me was the most challenging part of being a target for the Brotherhood for speaking out about 9/11. And that was, I was told over and over that speaking about this was dishonoring the Brotherhood. And I never really understood it. I get it, but I didn't really understand it, because to me, to just go along with the lie was like, how is that anyway honoring? So part of the work we really have to do here as firefighters for 9/11 Truth is firefighter culture work, that helping see that it's okay, we were misled, and that never again is not to continue endless wars that we want to kill, we want to punish, we want to put people in prison. It's like, here's an opportunity for us to wake up together and see that it took all of us being asleep at the wheel for this to happen. And to blame others more than others, that's not what's going to solve it. It's us going internal and really seeing and doing the work on ourselves to see how we showed up. And that's what the kind of the essence of what we're saying here is never forgetting, absolutely, because the sacrifice, not only the 343, but all the people who've been killed in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, from the 9/11 wars, the illnesses, and all the control systems we see right now coming online really fast. If we forget how that happened, it's going to continue again. And then the never again, but misled, and the essence there for me, I'll say, is I was misled because I chose to be misled. I saw things that I just didn't want to consider, and I was afraid of what that might mean if I went down into that, explored it. So I'd say now's the time where so many of us are actually waking up to the way the world has been working. And when we do that together, what we can really do is create a never again, meaning where events like 9/11 or other false flags or hoaxes or whatever you want to say out there that's happening right now, that clearly a media story is being told, if we realize that we are being lied to, then we don't have to follow this. And that's where the never again happens. So to me, the greatest honor to the Brotherhood and everybody who's lost their lives throughout generations of standing for truth, the greatest honoring is for us to change ourselves so that together we can change this world. And yeah, with that, if there's questions or whatever, I guess I'm kind of done. The websites, again, I'll just rename those, is ff911truth.org and protectingall.org and brotherhoodinvitation.com. And
so if anybody has a question for Mr. Lawyer, I'm sure he has a little time left. I'm I'm sure he would be happy to answer that. I
There
don't,
is a question that came up while you were speaking, from Ray. Was the blast pressure of the explosion that happened in that field near Shanksville ever calculated? How powerful was it, and did the explosion generate seismic waves? Do you know?
I don't know that question, no. And I would say this is where the lawyers committee and or Richard's work and that stuff really comes in, because what we highlighted with firefighters, and still are with Firefighters 9/11 Truth, is the investigation. So the fact that it didn't follow national standards, that's what we highlight. So we can show it was an illegitimate investigation. There really wasn't one done. And that's where the lawyers committee's work is so critical now, because they're, in a way, like Richard said, the tip of the spear, and they're taking all this in. Now, my suggestion would be, as a movement, we don't get lost in the details of explosions and the different things that might distract us from keeping forward momentum going on bringing more awareness and getting this into the courts. So from long answer, no, I don't know what that, I haven't investigated that myself.
Okay, there have been some warm things said to you that I urge you to go ahead and look at the Q&A when you're done here. And maybe you can respond to people in writing. There is a question here, if you would you be willing to provide your contact information so that people can get in touch with you?
Yes, I am. And the best would be team, TEAM, at ff911truth.org. So team at ff911truth.org.
Bill says, how have been all of the testimonies of the firefighters about the events of 9/11 been ignored? The first been, I don't think how have all the testimonies of the firefighters about events of 9/11 been ignored? Where are they now?
Well, they were ignored through the investigation and the original hearings, but through the Federal Information Act, they got it through the New York Times, so they still exist. They're, what I said, Richard would be better one to answer this, but I believe it's 150 plus they have, and those do exist. So you can just Google them and find them. And we have, I think we might have a link on our website too.
Peter asks, would you be available to come and speak in Maine? And Milton asks, did you say you were threatened?
In the past, I was. Now, no. Now I'm coming with a completely different approach. And in the past, yeah, it was intense and scary in the beginning. But we're talking 14 years ago now. So the times have changed, the culture's changed. People are ready for this. It's not the same. And going to Maine, yes, send an email. I'd have to know more about it. Just send me an email and we'll talk about that.
I just have a quick question. Could you give us the gist of the documentary? Obviously, I think we should all go watch it, but could you give us the gist of the documentary, Calling Out Bravo 7?
Yeah, it's Paul. It was his first movie he's ever made, which is shocking to me for the quality. And David Chandler wrote a review on it saying it's the most accurate 9/11 documentary he's ever seen. And the gist is on Tower 7. So Paul starts with an approach that kind of helps people connect with the firefighters first and not go into 9/11 or even Tower 7, helps build a foundation of shared reality of physics and firefighting and that type of thing, and history of buildings that have burned, high rises. So it kind of builds this foundation. So by the time he finally brings in the evidence directly related to Tower 7, and what most firefighters who have looked at have been told was the water supply wasn't working, all kinds of things that weren't accurate. And so Paul, through the documentary, approaches these one by one, and you start to see that even in one of the videos, you'll see the sprinklers are going off in the building. So it's like it was working. So it's a firefighter produced, and several of us worked on it, and a approach that's a lot easier for people to let in, I would say. And now when people watch it and they see there's more firefighters standing together, I think it's going to have more of an impact.
Lenore has asked, are you looking for more firefighters to put in your video? I know a retired chief from Oakland, California.
Yes. So if you go to the site, you'll see the wall of honor, and there's actually a button to add your own video, and we're going to verify, make sure they're professional firefighters. But yes, that's the point, is we want to get a wave of these going out, like YouTube shorts and all that, to just start waking people, raising awareness more, I'd say.
And which
then we can
site is
add
that?
messages. Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, which is www.ff911truth.org.
Mick Harrison has his hand raised.
And I do too, Barbara.
Hey, Eric.
Hi, Mick.
So I had a question for you. I'm wondering if you or either of your organizations have looked at how the steel was removed from the Trade Center site, the ground zero, in some cases very rapidly, and whether you have an opinion on whether normal procedure for fire investigations were followed or ignored during the aftermath.
Yeah, we do. It's actually on our website. And the work I did with Richard too, Experts Speak Out, we talked about it. And then the documentary goes into it quite a bit. So it was a crime. The national standards, if it is going to be removed for rescue and recovery operations, it needs to be secured until the investigation is complete. So if you want to go more into that, we can get you more on it, but it's basically, that is one of the pieces he covers in calling out Bravo 7, and how, that was a felony. I mean, we've never seen it done before. And the point I made before in the past was, like, to help put this in perspective, they destroyed the evidence at a house fire. We don't do that. Like, why would you do it on the first time, like a building, Tower 7, that had never been hit by a plane or anything? Why would we do that? I mean, to me, that's clear cover up. And then it was also, the evidence was destroyed. So all the national standards and federal evidence protection laws show it has to be preserved until all and like one of the lines is, until all basic, not responsible, but all parties that have a stake in it, have an interest in it, they all have to agree before that evidence can be destroyed. So the fact you just can't defend that in court.
Eric?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Barbara.
Barb Heininger. I have a kind of heartfelt question for you here, like they all are. And that is, in your presentation a little bit earlier, you said, I understand, without saying what it is you understand. So my question is, can you help us understand what you understand or believe you understand when so many of your firefighter brothers said that you were at the beginning, before you changed your stance, that you were betraying the brotherhood? I do not understand. Can you help us understand?
Yeah, I can, because I was in the same position. My lieutenant back in 2001, through past 2008, had been telling me from the very beginning, he's like, this doesn't make sense. He could see it right away, which very few people I knew could. And when he would bring that up, we would all attack him. And I told him, if he really believed that was possible, that our country could do something like that. And I looked at it as our country. I didn't want to see that there's way more, I'll just say, dynamics at play than the government doing it. I'm not saying that. It's those who control governments. And so I would get angry, and I told him to leave the country. And so what these other firefighters were showing me was the way I was approaching it before I had my own awakening. And what it is the brotherhood it's very tight, and our lives depend on each other. And so if one of us, the way I looked at it and the way they were looking at me was what we call a wackadoodle. So you've gotten lost, you've gone and you followed these crazy people on the internet that are saying this was an inside job. That is so disrespectful to the brotherhood. You're like making it about an inside job versus the sacrifice they made. And they didn't want to go there. Like, it's just, I've had some of the people in that video you just saw that we shared were ones that didn't want to go there at all, that are now speaking out, which to me is huge. And what I mean, they didn't want to go there. One of my chiefs, and I'll not name any names at all, but he was literally brought in as part of the FEMA drill that was happening when 9/11 happened. So one of the patterns in these false flags is there's always a drill happening. It creates a way to create smoke, basically. Blame it on the drill. We were there, we knew, because we had a drill. So this chief was there for the drill. So he ended up becoming one of the commanders during the initial collapse. So in the FEMA, or in the command center. So he told me later, years later, we finally agreed to disagree. And he said, Eric, I totally believe in the work you're doing and this other stuff that's outside of 9/11. But he said, I can never go there. And I asked him why. And he said, because if I do, I lose everything. He said, I lost so many brothers and the death and destruction I saw, and then to have it just take everything out from under me. He goes, I can't do that yet. So in a way, he was owning it. Like, it's just, we're asking people, especially if you shove it down their throat, you're asking them to go somewhere where they might not be ready as a soul. So where I'm at now is I trust people's soul and provide information, make it available, and they'll find it if they need to find it, but I don't need to shove it down people's throat.
I want to thank you so much, Eric, for your presentation. It's huge. It's you can feel it in your heart and in your brain, and it's very important, and we support you, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing. It's extremely important.
Yes. Thank you. And I want to thank the Lawyers Committee and Mick, especially with your support with Papa also. I'm just super grateful for everybody here. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Charlotte Dennett. If, as many in the 9/11 movement believe, there's a great deal of evidence pointing to 9/11 being a pre-planned operation to kick off the global war on terrorism, few are as well positioned to review that evidence and help take it to court than the daughter of America's first master spy in the Middle East, who also happens to be a brilliant investigative reporter and a lawyer. Charlotte Dennett is a member of the Lawyers Committee Board and author of the book, The People versus George Bush, one lawyer's campaign to bring the president to justice and the grassroots movement she encountered along the way. Exposing the criminal agendas of governments and the powerful oligarchies that often control them to pursue massive profits has been central to Dennett's professional life. Another big example, she co-authored with her husband, Gerald Colby, the 1,000+ page tome looking into the Rockefeller family's business interests in Latin America, titled Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and Evangelism in the Age of Oil. Dennett's decades-long investigations into the oil industry and the Bush and Rockefeller family agendas provides the big picture view of the now never-ending global war on terror and the 9/11 spark that set it off. Her presentation today is titled, and aptly so, Follow the Pipelines, the Key to 9/11 and the Global War on Terror. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hello there, Christina, and hello, everybody. I've been so moved by the testimony, people acting out of conscience. They just have to tell the truth. And a lot of people do take risks. I understand, as a journalist and as a lawyer, I had to carefully consider whether I wanted to join the board because some people were warning me that it would hurt my professional career. But I did it anyway. I came on very recently, fortunately, when all these legal breakthroughs were going on, which gives the board even more credibility. And so I'm proud of my colleagues. And I was very moved by Eric. He talked about 9/11 wars. That's the first time I've heard of it being called 9/11 wars. So I always have something to learn. But anyway, I've written a book. My latest book is titled Follow the Pipelines. And the subtitle is Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. So I'm going to give a slide presentation and hope that everything works okay. So here I am sharing my screen. And now I'm looking, there it is. Slideshow. I'll be with you in just a second. From the beginning.
Looks good.
All right, here we go. except you can't see it on the top. I don't know if I can bring it down. Oops. All right. Well, never mind. So what I'm going to give you is a geopolitical analysis of 9/11. Christina gave a hint about that. I discovered the pipeline linked to 9/11 by investigating the mysterious death of my master spy father back in 47, following a top secret mission to, guess where? Saudi Arabia. Only this was in 1947. And I was 6 weeks old when he died. And it was only when I later became a journalist in the Middle East that I began wondering about the circumstances behind his death. And I eventually began to discover pipeline links not only to Saudi Arabia in 1947, but to all the endless wars of this century, which Eric has called the 9/11 wars. So that's a picture of my father, a map. I think it's at the Indian Ocean. He was, God, it's too bad it's cut off like this. But anyway, he was head of counterintelligence for the entire Middle East. He was an Arab scholar. He studied at Harvard. He knew the Quran. He taught at American University of Beirut right after college. And then he got picked up by the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, during World War II, and was posted to Lebanon from 44 to the time of his death in 47. So yeah, his last mission was to Saudi Arabia, and I have concluded after my investigation that he was one of America's first victims of the great game for oil.
Charlotte, it's not cut off for us. We can see everything.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. So that is the cover of my book in its paperback version. And I want you to look very carefully at the map there. You can see 3 pipelines pictured. Two of them are solid and one of them is dotted. That was the projected Trans-Arabian pipeline. The other 2 were built in the 30s, and if we have time, I'll get to them earlier. But just notice where the terminal points are. They're in the Eastern Mediterranean, and one of the terminal points for the Iraqi pipeline, notice, is in Haifa, Palestine. Just keep that in your head when you think about the Middle East conflict that's been raging since after World War II. I discovered a New York Times article. It was really terrific. And it had a map to it. It said that a pipeline was the source of was a new issue for the world and actually for the United States. When I read the article and then I looked at this map, the article was explaining how Saudi oil was crucial to rebuilding post-war Europe. And it was going to catapult the United States into being not only a major power in the Middle East, but also a world power, all because of Saudi oil, which had these enormous reserves. So he'd gone over there, and what his job was to do was to determine the route. What route should this pipeline go through? Because pipelines have to be protected. And here's a key quote from the article. Here's the article called "Oil Concessions Raise Questions Involving the Position of Russia." The competition with Russia has never ended, right up till now, and Ukraine. This is what I said: protection of the pipeline will become a prime objective of American foreign policy. And what they meant here was military and economic, but military protection of that pipeline was key. And so from this article, I was beginning to develop a pipeline consciousness. I explain it all in the book because I only have a limited amount of time, but here we go. And so this is a picture of me. I was photographed by the New York Times photographer. They did a story on my case. I sued the CIA and to try to get more information out of them, a FOIA case. And one of the things I got back from this heavily redacted document was a key sentence that they forgot to black out. We must control the oil at all costs. That meant battling with the British, the French, and the Russians. They were our allies. All of them coveted Saudi oil and resented growing American power. So that's when I talk about the great game for oil. So there it was. But the competition for oil, why? Most people, when you ask what's oil important for, they say heating fuel, gasoline, factories, and so on. They don't often recognize that oil is the fuel and still is the fuel of the military. Germany lost both World War I and World War II because its tanks and fighter planes literally ran out of gas. And so every superpower took that into consideration. We must control the oil at all costs. And I saw that slogan repeated over the decades. Now, let's get into some of the players of the great game. Well, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and this will all get to 9/11, I promise. Zbigniew Brzezinski was one of them, of course, national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, but he was more than that. He was a very, very close association with David Rockefeller, the banker and oil Zion. He was largely instrumental in making Afghanistan Russia's Vietnam before the U.S. invaded. And he got the CIA to fund jihadists to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. He had a view that he wanted the U.S. to control all of Eurasia. That was his plan. Well, that happened to jibe. Well, you know who this man is. Henry Kissinger. He once said, if you control the oil, you control the world. And for this reason, it's undisputable. Oil is the most important commodity in the world. And pipelines, one of my father's colleagues revealed way back in 47, pipelines like Pipeline are the arteries of empire. And he even said back in 47, that's right, an American empire in the Middle East. And now we know where it's an empire of the world. Then there's this man. I think you know who he is. Most of the viewers probably know about his role leading up to 9/11, Dick Cheney. He had set up the think tank of neocons with Robert Kagan. And I couldn't resist saying here, his wife would be involved in the 2014 coup in Ukraine. I've done quite a bit of writing about the Ukraine as the next endless war. And their goal was to make, like just as Brzezinski wanted the U.S. to be the preeminent world power and to target hostile regimes that got in their way. One of them was Iraq. Cheney in 1998 traveled to Afghanistan, and he identified the Caspian Sea as strategically significant and an alternative to the conflict-ridden Middle Eastern oil. Of course, we all know about the famous statement in 2000 by the neocons about needing a new Pearl Harbor if they were ever going to get Americans to agree to another foreign adventure, another war. He also wanted to get into Iran, by the way, and he still does. He's the head of the Halliburton, the major oil supplying corporation. This is a great quote he made back in, I don't know, the 80s, maybe, or no, probably around 2000. I love this quote. The good Lord didn't see fit to put oil and gas only where that countries that are democratically elected. In other words, regimes friendly to the U.S. And I think he was meaning at that point Iran, but he couldn't get into Iran because of sanctions, the hostage crisis, and so on. Just couldn't get in. So he looked elsewhere for his oil interests. And because he had this interest in the Caspian Sea, he started considering what would be viable pipeline routes because the Caspian Sea is landlocked. One of them was south through Afghanistan and via TAPI. That stands for Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan-India pipeline, or it could go west through the BTC pipeline. That's named after the cities Baku, Tbilisi, and Ceyhan in Turkey pipeline, or north through Ukraine, by the way. And as I have learned, it's all a bypassing game. Bypass Russia. And I'm just going to give you a quick, all right, keep going. I learned about the role of the TAPI pipeline in the war, the invasion. I learned it first with a wonderful book on the Taliban by Rashid, and it's called The Taliban. And he talks about, he couldn't figure out where the Taliban were coming from, and then he said, suddenly he was a Pakistani, and he happened to go to a Unicol, U.S. oil company headquarters, and this guy with suit was coming out. What he eventually found out is that events in Afghanistan were not really run by the government. They were run by oil executives and intelligence agents. And by the way, what is the importance of intelligence agents? They're the ones that got to know how to create a safe route for a pipeline. You know, if the oil will never get out of the ground and get distributed if it isn't through pipelines or tankers, but pipelines cheaper and usually. And that requires a lot of spying on the native people to see whether they're going to react well. The Taliban had been lined up by President Bush as being the best warriors to defend this pipeline route, and they had even been invited to his ranch in Texas. Then what happened is the 9/11 happened, and they were getting at odds even before then. There were questions of transit fees that they were going to be paid, and also right after 9/11. The U.S. Bush insisted that they had to turn over Osama bin Laden, and they refused, saying, show us the proof that he was behind 9/11. And the U.S. did not provide the truth. And I think there are a lot of people who believe that, in fact, he was not the mastermind of 9/11 as claimed. And so they didn't turn him over. So there was the pretext for sending the troops into Afghanistan. And then this man, a Canadian, who's written about oil and has worked for the World Bank and BP, he tipped me off that the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan was so the energy could flow south. And that was quoting a State Department person. So there you go. You see that the Caspian Sea is up there on the left-hand side, and it runs through Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. It was going to go to an Enron plant, by the way. There were two pipelines considered, both for natural gas and oil. And if you see the little balloons there, those are actually where military bases were set. So as you can see, most of the major military bases were along the pipeline routes. Remember what I said, must be protected at all costs. These are the other routes that were considered. This one actually got built, and I just wanted to show you. See the Caspian Sea on the right? You see the Black Sea on the left? Guess what? Black Sea, full of oil and gas. Think about that when you look at the whole Ukraine thing. But this one, they almost came to blows in Georgia near the pipeline route. Discussed in my book, we almost got into World War III over Russian skirmishes in that area with the Georgians, and it was fortunately averted. Now this is, I just wanted to show you, this was the third alternative, going from the Caspian Sea. It's sort of hard to read this map, but when you start over at the far right, and that's Baku, which is on the shores of the Caspian Sea. If you follow that black line through all the way to the left up to Odessa, it was going to go under, the idea is that they were going to run it under the Black Sea, and they were going to avoid all the Russian-owned pipelines, of which there are many. And then I found a 2000 RAND paper, and it was all about the Caspian Sea and developing the energy resources. And they realized that if they went in big, they were going to stir up hostilities with Russia. They knew it, but they did it anyway. This is what the pipeline network looks like today. I just want to give you that picture. If you want to understand the war in Ukraine, which I am calling a war between, it's an energy war between petropowers. All right, so now the history and context. Those are two keys for trying to figure out an issue, right? Like what caused 9/11, what caused the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the trouble in the Middle East, the 9/11 wars. And I say just follow the pipelines. And I'm going to just give you some more examples. But first, let's go back to this map again. So you can see, if you're looking at this geopolitically, what do you see? You see the Soviet Union to the north, and you see that it borders Iran. It also borders the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And you can see some pipelines that have already been built in 1947. Well, the whole point here, people ask why did the U.S. want to go into the Middle East when it had its own oil? And the reason is they wanted to prevent the Soviets. They did not want the Soviets to move into Iran. They did not want them, certainly didn't want them to get into Saudi Arabia, any of the oil producing territories in the Middle East. So that's why the U.S. actually put a cap on oil producing wells in Latin America, so that they could concentrate on securing the oil of the Middle East. And this is Iraq. As we know, Iraq was on top of Bush's agenda as soon as he came into power, and he even said so. I mean, he'd been in office just a few weeks when he talks about how are we going to get into Iraq? What's behind Iraq? Well, these are the earlier pipelines I mentioned. They were built in the 30s. I had to go back in time because they were conceived even earlier. And I learned that getting the oil of Iraq in World War I was a first-class war aim of the British, and they succeeded. And then after the war, they divided up this whole area between British and French mandates. Why? So they could control the oil at all costs. And you'll see here where the southern route ends in Haifa, Palestine. Coming up to 2003, Benjamin Netanyahu, at the time the Treasury Secretary, no, head of the Treasury, I believe. Anyway, he was a huge advocate of the war in Iraq. And he said that pipeline that you see connecting to Haifa, he wanted it reopened. It had been closed in the 1948 war with Israel. He wanted it reopened. And he was even boasting about 2 weeks after the invasion of Iraq that oil was going to be flowing to Haifa, and it's not a pipe dream. Well, guess what? It was a pipe dream. It still hasn't been built because of all the instability in the area. And by the way, banks will not support pipeline constructions unless there is stability. So there's that dimension. I just wanted to point out that there are huge oil and gas fields off the coast of Lebanon and obviously Israel, and there's Gaza down there, and they're hotly disputed. And I have attributed the Gazan wars. They were done in 2007 and 2010, if I've got my dates right. Horrific bombing. And the reasons the Israelis did not want the Palestinians to get any oil revenue that would give them independence. The argument was that it would be used to support terrorism. And these are two competing pipeline schemes that involve Syria. One of them was the one in the lower right-hand corner, was going to take oil from Qatar, which is sort of on the coast of Saudi Arabia, eastern coast, and it was to pass through Syria and go through Turkey and up there. Assad, the president of Syria, rejected that because he knew that his Russian backers wouldn't accept it. It would be competitive to all those other pipelines that it's got going in Europe. So he rejected it, but then he proposed another pipeline scheme that was going to run from Iran. Look at Iran over there on the right-hand corner. And it was going to go through Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And that, as soon as he started floating that idea, you start to see U.S. efforts beefed up to undermine the regime of Assad. Now, many people say he's a dictator, he's vicious to his people, to some groups and not to others, but yes, of course. And he had CIA torture camps there. But what I'm looking at is from a geopolitical perspective. What precipitated the civil war that happened in Syria, particularly gruesome around 2011? We've come full circle. There's the famous fist bump. I've come full circle. I started my investigation into the Trans-Arabian pipeline, and what did that have to do with my father's death? And all of us have been brought now to President Biden's going to Saudi Arabia and having to deal with Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi prince, actually the nominal ruler, even after he had Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, brutally killed and dismembered. His nickname is MBS. Some people call him Mohammed Bonesaw. But here's another example of Americans repeatedly having to turn a blind eye to all the excesses of the Saudis. And of course, the Saudis are, we know, deeply implicated in 9/11. So the moral of the story, this is what I get from it. Oil trumps everything, even Trump. It continues to rule us. It continues to lie to us about everything in the sun, whether it's 9/11 or climate change or the wars. They're all considered national security issues, don't you know? So that's why they don't want us to know the truth. And as I say, controlling oil at all costs leads to massive death, destruction, and climate change. Another conclusion, oil powers will seek to protect their interests in oil at all costs. And that includes the cost of thousands of lives lost on 9/11 and afterwards. I have some final thoughs. I'm very glad that we're dedicating this to David Ray Griffin. I want to personally solidarize myself with all the 9/11 families and victims who have not given up on their search for the truth, because getting closure on a strange death of a loved one is a very basic, very human feeling. I had it, and I'm sure how many thousands of people have that feeling. They wish they understood, but they don't dare. Some of them don't dare look at it for the very reason that Eric Lawyer so beautifully put it. And like Richard Gage and my other colleagues on this committee, I felt a duty both as a lawyer and investigative journalist to get at the truth. And I'm sure many of you feel that way. And I just say that other than the publication of my book, Follow the Pipelines, one unexpected result from my personal endeavor was to be invited by the CIA in 2019 to honor my father at their annual wall ceremony. If I can't elaborate, if you want to ask me. And the result is this. I should get rid of it, but it's honor our fallen hero. And there he is. And to me, everyone that is involved in this very important quest is my hero. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You know, I have a quick question for you. And that is, if in a nutshell, how would you say that 9/11 is part of this? I mean, you explained all the pipeline wars and so on, but why 2001? Why at that time? What?
Well, like Bush and Cheney and the neocons, as I did explain, they wanted to get in. Now, the way I looked at it is they were small leagues. They were small oil people. I think I missed showing you a statement by Bush in 2000, in which he said, "Hey, I want to build pipelines." That's what he said in one of his 2000 campaign speeches. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, that's nice. I wasn't on to the actual pipeline connection, but yeah, they wanted to get in. And see, majors are the ones that usually get the big contracts, like ExxonMobil, Texaco, BP, Total, all the major ones. They get the lucrative deals. My hypothesis is that the Bush Cheney people, they were minor league, and they wanted to get in, and they knew that Iraq was swimming with oil. They even said so. Wolfowitz, one of the neocons, said that. And so how are they going to do it? So they needed a pretext, obviously. And they were so convinced, apparently, of their immunity and their impunity, that they even put out, said they needed a new Pearl Harbor to do it. Well, if you look at 9/11, what could be more catastrophic than that? And look what happened. I mean, for sure, the everything that followed, it's on our website, all the horrible things that followed afterward, the endless wars, the breakdown in our democratic rights. It became much more difficult to get information. It's because they were, they needed to do the crime. And then as they say, whenever there's a crime, there's always a cover-up, right? I mean, it just follows. So we've been dealing with a cover-up for years, but I think we're finally getting breakthroughs. Does that answer your question enough, Christina? I have a sense that Barbara, who's following me, is going to add some more information.
Sonia H wants to know, did you find out what exactly happened to your father?
Well, I mean, he died in a plane crash, right? I got really close. I've got about as close to knowing. I certainly know what the motive was. I can't prove the means. The motive was that our allies, again, were very jealous of the United States gaining so much power. And so when he was headed off to Ethiopia, first of all, the British were totally freaked out. The Americans were getting involved in a big way in the Middle East and trying to shove them out, which they were. The Americans were doing that. So Ethiopia was totally controlled by the British. Every aspect of life at this time. Haile Selassie was complaining to the Americans. He didn't control his foreign policy. He didn't control the railroads. He didn't control the roads. Any kind of communication, it was all completely through the British. In come these upstart Americans, and on the plane was secret telecommunications equipment, part of which was going to be used to setting up an Ethiopian-owned and TWA, Christina, TWA controlled, managed new Ethiopian Airlines. So the British are among my prime suspects, and I go into that in the book. Soviets were also very alarmed by the U.S. Developing a big presence in Saudi Arabia, and they warned about military bases being set up around the world. They are my top suspects. Even the French. That's what I mean. allies. They're all competing against each other. They're all hungry for the oil, and they'll do anything, even if it means bringing down, the great towers that killed up to 3,000 people and so many people afterwards. Of course, they'll do that. Most people think, "Oh my God, how could you do this?" They do it.
So Charlotte, we've got several questions here, two of them regarding Israel. Mike says, do you suspect Israeli involvement in the crime of 9/11 like you suspect Saudi involvement? And
go ahead.
And an anonymous attendee asks any comment on Israel's participation in the 9/11 massacre. So that sounds like both of them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me ask Barbara, are you getting into that? She's not listening.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Okay. So, well, there have been strong, first of all, very soon afterwards, of course, there was the videos of Israeli artists who were cheering and clapping, and I think they were videotaping, and they were arrested, I believe, and taken away. We have no idea what happened. I mean, that is one area for future investigation.
We have some idea, Charlotte.
Pardon me?
We have some idea of what happened to them.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do you want to say now, or you?
Yeah, let him.
Let me give you the short version.
Okay.
They were arrested by New Jersey State Police. They were turned over to the FBI. They were interviewed for months, held by the FBI. They were released prematurely, in my view, because the State Department and the CIA intervened and basically got them exported back to Israel, where they were apparently interviewed. And that interview, I think, is still available on the web. And that's one of the places where they seem to have said we were sent there to document the event.
Okay. Well, there are, of course, there's the whole precursor thing. A lot of people are pointing to the man who ended up buying or leasing, I'm not sure which it is, the whole World Trade Center complex, including Building 7. And that was a man by the name of Silverstein, who was very, very close to Benjamin Netanyahu. And it was determined that, why would he want the buildings to come down? Well, one of the arguments that's been offered is that they were an asbestos risk. And we have subsequently found that out from the collapse or explosion, that there was a huge amount of asbestos there. So maybe there was a feeling like, oh God, what are we going to do? It would be too expensive to do all the asbestos abatement. So why don't we just bring them down and then collect on the insurance, which happened. They did collect on the insurance. Those are just two examples, and apparently they were in communication. He was a very close friend of Netanyahu, who, as I've said, very much wanted, well, he certainly wanted the invasion of Iraq, but the question is, did he also want 9/11 to happen? I can't say that yet, but it's an area that needs to be explored, and like other aspects dealing with the Middle East, once you start looking at the Israelis, you're taking serious risks, because they also have a never again attitude, and it goes so far as we will not let anybody question our motives, our actions, anything. I mean, they look at the killing of Shireen recently, the Palestinian reporter. It's amazing they finally conceded, and the Israelis may have killed Shireen Abu Akleh. So if you're going to explore that angle, you're going to do it with a certain amount of risk. They love to go after people, but as everybody else here has done, they've taken on a certain amount of risk because they feel it in their conscience that they've got to take it on.
Okay, Ron has asked, do you think that Russia's military needs Middle East oil and transit routes through Ukraine, or are they self-sufficient? If they are self-sufficient, what use is denying them access to oil outside their borders?
Well, that's a heavy question. I'm sorry, could you read it? Could you repeat it one more time? I have to
Do
think
you
about
think that, do you think that Russia's military needs Middle East oil and transit routes through the Ukraine, or are they self-sufficient? And if so, what use is denying them access to oil outside their borders?
Well, the Russians, as they're the second largest producers next to the United States of oil and natural gas, and they control 40% of the energy needs of Europe. What Russia is doing is, why are they focusing on Eastern Ukraine? Well, here's a little piece of information that's not told, probably for national security reasons. That's where most of the oil and gas is. That's where the major deposits are. They're in Eastern Ukraine, and they're also in the Black Sea. And so it's the great game. They don't want the Americans to get in there. They want it for themselves. And I mean, there's a bigger history on that they consider that part of them. But and they didn't want further NATO encroachment on their borders, which has happened. So I think it's basically great gamemanship. They don't necessarily need, I don't think, more oil and gas. But they also see what the West has been doing, well, since 2000, when I talked, there's this RAND report that came out and said the Caspian was the big region. And well, that's their territory, don't you know? And so that NATO was increasingly encroaching on the Eastern European countries around that whole region. The former Soviet republics. So they saw what the NATO countries were doing was threatening them. Does that give them the right to invade the territory of Ukraine? No. I mean, Ukraine is a sovereign territory. But if you use history and context, and you go back in time, you will see a much different picture about what led up to this war than what you're getting in the mainstream media, quite frankly. And I have a website in development, but you can see it. It's called followthepipelines.com. And I've been writing about Ukraine, and I'm going to be posting some of my pieces up there. You can just Google me and you'll find my articles that'll explain more what's at stake.
Charlotte, I want to thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And we're going to move on to another ace researcher and investigator. Barbara Honegger is the Lawyers Committee. Hold on just a minute. He's the Lawyers Committee Board co-chairman and a master connector of the dots, unraveler of the impossible to unravel, asker of incisive questions, and finder of the devils in the details and of the buried bodies, especially when it comes to high-level government malfeasance. And no wonder, since she served in high-level government positions, including White House policy analyst and special assistant to the president. Her landmark book, October Surprise, exposing the deep story behind the Iran side of the Iran-Contra scandal, now confirmed by formerly classified documents, triggered a congressional investigation. Barbara's work on 9/11 has been persistent, energetic, and informative on many fronts. She's widely recognized as a leading researcher, author, and public speaker on the 9/11 Pentagon attack and anthrax attacks. And today she's going to be talking about the anthrax links to 9/11. Welcome.
Thank you. I have there we go. There was a piece of text over my nose. It's now gone. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to make some personal remarks at the beginning before I get into my slides and my kind of official presentation today. The first thing I want to say is how deeply personally indebted, not just myself, but all of us are. I'm gonna get emotional. To David Ray Griffin. On the 9th anniversary of 9/11, I visioned and organized, together with Richard Gage, putting a 2 billion candle power spotlight up into the literal physical sky of New York City to represent World Trade Center 7 and the truth about it, and therefore also the link to the real truth about what really happened to the Twin Towers, World Trade Center 1 and 2. And it happened that David was, I was told by Elizabeth Woodward, very close to death at that very time. And so when I leapt up into the back of the pickup truck and had the honor of poking the 4 buttons on the 4 huge generators that burst this 2 billion candle power spotlight into the sky, right? And it appeared from the right perspective, and we have photographs of it. It's become an icon for the whole 9/11 truth movement. It appeared from the right perspective in the photos. Literally, it's the 3rd beam in the sky, because you could see the original 2, and then we put ours up. As that beam burst into the heavens, and we didn't know if it would work, and boy, did it go up with a huge whoosh. I yelled out from the bed of the truck to something like 100 9/11 truth activists who were surrounding the truck on the sidewalk and on the street that this beam is dedicated to David Ray Griffin, because he was at death's door and he needed our prayers, all of our prayers. And we prayed together on that beam. When we got the spotlights back to my partner's apartment, Steve White in Manhattan, only about 4 blocks from Ground Zero that night, I emailed Elizabeth Woodward, David Ray Griffin's longtime true partner. And I told her what had happened, that we had dedicated the beam to David. And I asked her to tell his wife, Anne. And it wasn't long before I got the word back from Elizabeth, who's going to be on Richard Gage's special event tomorrow, the 9/11 Film Festival on September 11th, beginning at 10 a.m. Pacific, on his website, richardgage911.org. Elizabeth will be speaking tomorrow there. I got the word back from Elizabeth that she had told Anne, who, as I understand it, whispered in David's ear that he was either in a coma or close to it. He was unresponsive. And she whispered in his ear that the beam had succeeded and that it was dedicated by a group prayer to him and his recovery. And I was told through Elizabeth, from Anne to Elizabeth to myself, that a huge smile came over David's face, and that he asked his wife for a pen and paper to make notes of everything he still needed to do for 9/11 truth. And he came back. David, we love you. And we are praying for you. The next personal note I want to make before I go into my kind of bring myself together here and go into my formal presentation is to remind everyone. You have just heard a brilliant presentation by our colleague and Lawyers Committee board member, co-board member, Charlotte Dennett, who's also a wonderful attorney and scholar and author and public speaker. And you've heard the real geopolitical context of 9/11, which is the real geopolitical context. But I want to remind everybody that what we're really about here is about 3,000 people died from the actual attacks on 9/11. But we're doing what we're doing, not just for the 9/11 family members and the injured survivors, but also for the entire world. And one of the reasons for that is that though about 3,000 people were killed on 9/11, the 9/11 official deception, the 9/11 big lie, has resulted in at least 1 million people being killed and multiple millions the last time I looked, 5 to 6 to 7 million people displaced either outside of their countries in the Middle East or within their countries. So let's just keep that in mind. And before I start my formal presentation, I just want to say that especially as a result of Richard Gage's, my dear friend and brother in the movement, of his extremely serious, high gravitas presentation, the Lawyers Committee needs your help, and we need it more than ever now. We truly need your help. We need your financial help. So do everything you can by going to lcfor911.org and help us win this worldwide victory for you, for everyone. Okay, now I'm going to try to share my screen and get into the details of the anthrax attacks and some very, very important information that's actually shocking and proven about the anthrax attacks that most of you probably don't know. So I'm going to try to share my screen now. I'm going to share the sound. I'm going to optimize. I'm going to choose the right window. And now I'm going to share. And I need you to tell me if you see my first slide.
We see the right half of it, Barb.
Yeah, I'm moving it. Do you see it now?
That's better. Can you move it a little more?
Move it to the right?
We've got one letter on the left block. There we go.
Okay.
Maybe just a little bit more.
Well, I can't because then
Okay.
I see maybe you can tell me how to get out of seeing.
No. It's good. It's good.
Is it good? Okay. All right. Unfortunately, that is not my first slide. There's my first slide. Okay. Here's my formal presentation. It's titled Anthrax Links to the Day of 9/11 Itself. Now, that should surprise everybody. On the left is an iconic image, of course, of both World Trade Center towers after they were struck and before the first one, the South Tower, came down. The second one hit, but the first one to come down, that should be a huge red flag right there. And then on the right are and there were more than two of the anthrax letters. The most important ones, as you'll see from this presentation, two senators, Leahy and Daschle, who were the two Democratic senators who received the most weaponized, engineered, militarized anthrax ever known to all of the anthrax experts on the planet. And that was in two letters that they received as they were the two senators trying to hold back the worst and most egregious parts of the Patriot Act before the Patriot Act was passed. So the real gist of this presentation, I'll give it up front, the bottom line, is that the official lie, the official deception of 9/11, one of them, a big one, is that the anthrax attacks, or that anything related to anthrax, wasn't even imagined, let alone expected or known by the top levels of the Bush-Cheney administration and the military intelligence industrial complex before approximately October 4th or 5th, which is when the first individual to be publicly known to have, on October 4th, to be close to dying of inhalation anthrax from a presumed letter that he received in Florida at his place of work, American Media Inc. He was the first person to be known to have be close to death, and he died on October 5th. That's a long time between the day of 9/11, September 11th, and October 5th, 4th or 5th. Do the math, it's a long time. So the official story is that the government had no idea that anthrax was involved whatsoever until then, which is what, 2.5 weeks, do the math. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. And yet, our own government, after the first trying to blame the anthrax letter attacks, once they happened, once they became known, trying to blame them on Iraq, and that didn't work. There are complicated technical reasons for that. The claim was that there were originally by the FBI that there was something called bentonite in the anthrax, some of the anthrax attack letters, and then they retracted that. And once there was no bentonite, which is what our government knew that was in the anthrax that Iraq had, and how did they know? It's because we gave it to them, a huge amount of it earlier. The government finally blamed one man, a kind of Lee Harvey Oswald of the anthrax attacks, Bruce Ivins, who was a microbiologist and a virologist, a bacteriologist and virologist at Fort Detrick, which is an Army, but they call it a biodefense lab, but it was actually a bioweapons and biodefense lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland. So the fall guy of the anthrax attacks, the so-called lone nut, was finally blamed by the FBI, the Department of Justice, for the anthrax attacks and no one else. And conveniently, he allegedly committed suicide before they blamed it on him and closed the entire investigation right after his alleged suicide. So the problem for the government is that it itself blamed the anthrax attacks as an inside job on a U.S. high-level Army military biodefense or really bioweapons facility, Fort Detrick. That is the official story. So now we're going to see the front page of the Washington Post. That's October 18th, okay? So October 18th is right after, it was presumably October 17th, the day before, shortly before, that those most highly weaponized anthrax ever known to humanity at 1 trillion spores per gram, highly aerosolized, so that it was literally a gas when it came out of their envelopes, and not only escaped into the offices of Senators Leahy and Daschle, because anthrax, especially military bioweapon, is a bioweapon. It is a weapon of mass destruction. This was a weapon of mass destruction, WMD, bioweapon attack on the US Congress, which was blamed on Bruce Ivins, but as you will see, falsely. However, as the Lawyers Committee has officially, in this case, developed and filed two grand jury petitions, one grand jury petition, as you'll see, and one petition to Congress on what really happened and didn't in the anthrax attacks. We now know, and it is in our petitions, our two petitions, that the FBI framed and blamed the wrong US military facility. Now, they've admitted it was an inside job, but they're trying to blame the wrong insider, the wrong US Army military facility, in order to protect the ones that really did it. So, next slide. How did the FBI get by with this deflection of blame onto Bruce Ivins and away from the real inside job perpetrators? They focused on something called the morphs, or the morphological variants, the DNA variants or morphs, that are kind of like fingerprints in the attack letter anthrax. And they did this on the claim that they were trying to identify the real perpetrator. And in fact, if you read our petitions that are on our website, lcfor911.org, you will see how they managed to deflect the blame from Dugway Proving Ground, which is another Army weapons facility, and Battelle Memorial Institute, which is also has many CIA contracts in bioweapons. So the compelling and legally dispositive evidence, and again, as Mick Harrison, our litigation director in the Lawyers Committee, pointed out, legally dispositive simply means we've proven it, that any jury or judge will not be able to deny the evidence. That's what dispositive means. So in our two petitions, to the US Congress and also to the US Attorney for the District of Columbia, which have been filed, and we are waiting for action upon them and will follow them up. The compelling and legally dispositive evidence that the government's anthrax attack patsy Bruce Ivans at Fort Detrick not only did not do it, but could not have physically done it, is in these grand jury petitions that I mentioned that are on our website. So be sure and go to LCFOR911 and read that evidence for yourself. And these are, for those of you who I'm sure that it won't be long if it's not already, the entire video of these presentations and our symposium will be up on the web in many places, including on the Lawyers Committee, as I understand it, our own YouTube channel. And you will be able to not only go to our website, but I've given the actual direct links here for all of our grand jury petitions, our evidentiary exhibits, and the executive summary. So those are official actions by the Lawyers Committee. We're very serious about the anthrax attacks. Now I'm going to begin my own personal research, part of which is contained, a very important part of which I will mention explicitly when I get to it, is in fact part of the evidentiary exhibits and the petition, the anthrax petitions of the Lawyers Committee. But now I'm getting into my own research, which goes beyond that. So it's my own research that has focused since 2008, when I first published this on Op-Ed News. And I will be showing you resources at the end where you can follow up with even more details from this presentation because of limited time. But because the government's own official story is that the 9/11 linked anthrax were an inside job at Fort Detrick, they claim, which was false. If clear links can be shown, and that's what we're going to see in this presentation, some huge tips of a bunch of icebergs. If clear links can be shown between anthrax in any way, or the expectation of anthrax being involved, or high, especially high-level executive department official responses to the expectation or the fear of an anthrax attack on the day of 9/11 itself, that would be compelling evidence, would it not, that 9/11 itself was an inside job, because the government has already admitted the anthrax attacks they claim were an inside job at the Army's biodefense bioweapons facility. And there are such clear links. I'm just going to list some of the main ones very quickly that I'm going to be giving you more details about. There were warnings and foreknowledge of anthrax attacks before 9/11, including inside the FBI itself. There were highest level government reactions to the expectation or fear of anthrax attacks on the day of 9/11 itself and the evening of 9/11 itself. Even government actions based on the fear that they may have already happened to Vice President Cheney and or his staff and President Bush and or his staff at the Florida school on the morning of 9/11, as you will see. President Bush, his White House staff, and his Air Force One staff on the plane itself on 9/11, and Vice President Cheney's White House staff were all put on at least a week's regime of anti-anthrax Cipro antibiotic on 9/11. You have to ask yourself why. The government wants you to believe, the Bush-Cheney administration wanted you to believe, that they had no knowledge or expectation of anthrax being involved at all with the 9/11 attacks or anything related to it until early October. A counterterrorism exercise on an explicit anthrax attack scenario had been pre-planned for months within Mayor Giuliani's New York City, his executive emergency response center, for months before 9/11, and it was pre-planned to run on the day after, on September 12th. However, a massive number of personnel, both within New York City, within New York State, and out of state, from New York itself, from FEMA, the United States military, and other federal government personnel, were conveniently already in place on the day before 9/11, so they were all there on 9/11. Now we're going to hear the top terrorism threats briefed to New York City Mayor Giuliani before 9/11 included biological terrorist attacks. Now, if this works, we're going to hear the video.
Because in all of the briefings that I received, the two areas that were emphasized were bombings, meaning suicide-type bombings, or an area that we haven't talked much about, but we should talk more about if we're looking toward the future, which is biological and chemical attack. Because in all of
So that was Mayor Giuliani to the 9/11 Commission. I don't remember if it was under oath, I believe it was, but he wanted you to believe that, he wanted you to understand that they had in fact expected and were preparing big time for biological and the possibility of chemical weapons attacks, WMD attacks in New York City. And now here's another clip from Mayor Giuliani's 9/11 Commission testimony. Let's see if we can get that one to go.
911 was overwhelmed. And should it have been larger? Should it have been anticipated? Yes, it probably should have, but it wasn't. It was one of those things that was not anticipated. If that information had been given to us or more warnings had been given in the summer of 2001, I can't honestly tell you we would have done anything differently. I mean, I don't, we were doing at the time all that we could think of.
Right.
911.
So what was Mayor Giuliani thinking of? He was preparing for an anthrax attack before 9/11, well before 9/11. There was a pre-planned and actual U.S. military and New York City FEMA exercises were advanced practice the 9/11 attacks and the anthrax attacks. So the first quote here is, I interviewed Bush White House counterterrorism czar Richard Clark when I was a senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School, which is a DoD university here in Monterey, the Monterey Peninsula of California. I was in that position for 16 years, 11 of them after 9/11. And I published this in a DoD, on our DoD website of the Naval Postgraduate School. He told me, quote, "We practice it, that is 9/11-like scenario counterterrorism exercises, including of planes hitting the world, at least one World Trade Center tower 5 times before 9/11, and that the National Security Advisor on 9/11 was, of course, Condoleezza Rice under President Bush, has to advance approve all such high-level exercises." So they knew about that. They knew about 9/11. They had already practiced at least 5 or 6 days on a series of hijack scenario exercises in the week leading up to 9/11. And another one, of course, was begun on the morning of 9/11 itself in the Northeast NORAD sector. And the biowarfare attack exercise called Dark Winter also advanced practiced the response to what would become the anthrax attacks. Even though it was, as I recall, on a smallpox scenario, it nevertheless basically practiced a bioweapon attack in New York City. So Giuliani, you just heard, said he couldn't imagine. Yet his own World Trade Center Office of Emergency Management had spent literally months before 9/11 preparing for explicitly an anthrax attack scenario counterterrorism exercise ready to begin on September 12th. And those happened to be the same months that we now know that controlled demolition explosive incendiaries had to have been pre-placed in not only World Trade Center 7, but also the Twin Towers. All right, and there's a link there to Giuliani's own Tripod 2 exercise, which was this anthrax scenario exercise that was to have been run on September 12th. But all of the personnel were already ready to go in New York City on the night, no later than the night of the 10th, and they were in New York City on the 11th. So when the World Trade Center 7 collapsed on 9/11, about 5:20 in the afternoon, Giuliani very quickly made the Tripod 2 anthrax scenario counterterrorism exercise command center, the entire official command center for the entire New York City and New York State and federal emergency response to the actual 9/11 attacks in New York City. And this is a relevant excerpt from Giuliani's 9/11 Commission hearing testimony. You need to read it for yourself. I'm going to read you just the most salient part. He said, the equipment, meaning to respond to the entire actual attacks that just happened to be the day before they were going to they were going to run this anthrax attack scenario exercise, the equipment was already there. That is on Pier 92. So we, meaning New York City, New York State, the feds, were able to establish their command center for the response to the actual World Trade Center attacks there on the pier. And then he adds, and that command center for the anthrax exercise was 2.5 to 3 times larger than their emergency operations center, command center, that they had lost in World Trade Center 7 at 5:20 on the afternoon of 9/11. And of course, we know that Giuliani knew in advance that World Trade Center 2 was about to fall, and also, of course, that World Trade Center 7 was going to fall. I want to remind people that the anthrax letters were dated 9/11. Now, these letters didn't become public, didn't become known to the public, and allegedly didn't become known to the federal government, including Bush and Cheney and the whole executive branch, until after they were first made public in mid-October or so of 2001, which was very much after 9/11 itself. But we already know that there were these serious links to 9/11 itself to anthrax. So the question can be raised, have the CIA and the US military ever tested on unwitting innocent American civilians anthrax dispersion tests using anthrax simulants, which is what would have been used or would have been claimed to have been used had the Tripod 2 anthrax scenario attack exercise gone forward on the 12th of September? Yes, they have. And they have done it a lot. And I want to remind you that later, when after we had already gone into Afghanistan using the pretext of the Live who attacked America on 9/11, just as the WMD lie in Iraq was used as the pretext to go into Iraq in the horrendous Iraq War. This was the turning point moment where then Secretary of State Colin Powell, Bush's Secretary of State, held up this little vial in which there was an anthrax simulant for his turning point speech in the United Nations that led to the Congress agreeing to go into Iraq for the Second Iraq War. So now we're going to get into some details very quickly. I'm going to go through them quickly of the actual anthrax, that it was at this turning point moment for the Second Iraq War that Colin Powell, Secretary of State, holds up none other than an anthrax simulant, okay, which is what is used and what would have been used or claimed to have been used had the Tripod 2 anthrax scenario exercise of Mayor Giuliani in New York City gone forward on September 12th. All right, so now we're getting very quickly, this is where I was, we're getting very quickly into the evidence for fear and expectation and response to the belief that anthrax was involved on the day of 9/11 itself, actual anthrax. Okay, not just the possibility of it. So on September 11th itself, Jerome Hauer, who had been the first director and founder of that very emergency Office of Emergency Management under Mayor Giuliani, located on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center 7, and was a self-proclaimed expert on the responses to high-rise building collapses, by the way, urgently and personally put Vice President Cheney's entire White House staff on the anti-anthrax antibiotic Cipro on 9/11. Wonder why. President Bush and his entire White House staff that was on Air Force One while Bush was flying back from Offutt Air Force Base to Washington, D.C. on the afternoon and evening of 9/11 in time for his 8 p.m. or so address to the nation that night, President Bush, the pilot and co-pilot of Air Force One, all White House staff on the plane, all military personnel on the plane, were put on anti-anthrax Cipro as well on at least a week's regime by Bush's personal White House physician, military doctor Richard Tubb, T-U-B-B. We're going to hear more about Richard Tubb, which is shocking information that I've just learned. So This is from an interview that was done from a book that I have. I'm going to show you the cover of it in a moment. But these are quotes from Dr. Tubb to the author of the book, and it's called "The Only Plane in the Sky." And I'm going to read you just some of these quotes. So Tubb, Dr. Tubb passed out anti-anthrax Cipro on Air Force One. And one of the people who received it was a Brian Montgomery. I don't know what his particular position was, but he was also on the plane. And the physician, the White House physician, asked him if he had ever heard of Cipro. And he said, well, why are you giving this to us? And Dr. Tubb said, well, we don't know what was in that Florida school. Well, that was the Florida school where Bush was on the morning of 9/11 before he was finally whisked out under panic by the Secret Service at about 9:32 in the morning. Okay, so what do we have here? We have, this is The Only Plane in the Sky. And Colonel Dr., it's Air Force Colonel, I believe, Air Force Colonel Dr. Richard Tubb. This is pages 366 to 367 of this book, The Only Plane in the Sky, is where you will read in more detail about it yourself. So what do we have? On 9/11, we have the entire highest echelon of the United States government in the White House when Bush and his White House staff on Air Force One got back and joined Cheney and his White House staff on the evening of 9/11. They were all on anti-anthrax Cipro, and they're not supposed to have had any idea that anthrax was involved with the day of 9/11 itself, and not involved at all until early October. This is a very, very important book, a new book called Game Over by Dr. Heiko Scherning. I believe he's Austrian. He could be from Germany, but I believe Austria. And the English edition will be available at the end of this month, on or around the 29th of this month or October 1st. And it can be pre-ordered on Amazon.com. I highly recommend it. You're going to hear a little bit later the shocking new information that he has discovered about Dr. Richard Tubb. William Patrick, the father of the U.S. biowarfare program, that is before the Biowarfare Convention was signed in the Nixon administration and outlawed any actual biowarfare research, which of course is already, has always been ongoing anyway, secretly. And what's very important is that the highly weaponized nature of the anthrax, especially in the two letters to Senators Leahy and Daschle, prove that the United States has continued its biowarfare program, not just a biodefense program, even though it is illegal under the Biowarfare Convention. But what's important here is that William Patrick, the father of the entire US biowarfare program, himself, he's now deceased, but on PBS television, I believe it was Frontline, this is a quote from that PBS TV, you can see it on YouTube. You need to go on anti-anthrax antibiotics in the very first 24 hours. Because if symptoms develop, any symptoms, it's almost certainly too late and you will probably die. So this fact, the very fact that the entire White House staff, Bush, Cheney himself, Vice President, President, all of the White House staff, and a lot of other people you can imagine in the highest levels of the Bush executive branch, military and intelligence, were all on anti-anthrax Cipro on 9/11. That fact rules out that President Bush and his White House staff and Cheney and his White House staff were put on Cipro only to a fear of a future potential second wave attack after the 9/11 attack. They were fearful that they had already been exposed. The FBI itself had been warned of and to expect an anthrax attack linked to a plane attack before 9/11. And now you're going to hear a statement to the New York Oral History Project by Bruno Dellinger, who had an office in World Trade Center 1, but luckily wasn't in it. He was down on the street below when World Trade Center 2 started to collapse, the first of the Twin Towers to collapse. And now you're going to hear what he had to say to the New York Oral History Project about how an FBI agent told him on that very morning, just as World Trade Center 2 was coming down, that they, the FBI, had been told to expect this, in quotes, this, which we can infer because the pyroclastic cloud was coming down the street right outside the plate glass windows of the bank that they had just gone in. He was standing next to the FBI agent who told him this. And hopefully we can hear this now.
And the sun reappeared, the light reappeared. I just went up to that FBI officer and I told him, I asked him, what should I do now? And he told me two things. He told me, listen, we've known about those, that it could happen.
Turn it up, Barb.
I can't.
And they're evacuating everybody towards the Brooklyn Bridge. Don't go there because it's a possible target. Go uptown. And the second thing he told me struck me because I had never heard of this. He told me, go to the hospital and get yourself checked for anthrax.
He said that very day?
He said that that very day. And I didn't know what anthrax was at the time. And he told me, who knows what the hell was in those planes.
Okay, if you could, it's a little bit weak.
So it struck me when the anthrax story unfolded a few weeks later. But, I didn't go to the hospital.
Okay, so what you just heard, it's a little bit weak because the original is weak and I have my sound on maximum volume. But at the end, he said that the FBI agent told him as they were looking, excuse me, I'll stop it. The FBI agent told him as the pyroclastic cloud from World Trade Center 2 collapsing was literally coming outside the glass doors that they were looking out of together, standing by on the other side of them, on the inside, told him that he needed to go to the hospital immediately after, as soon as he could, and get checked for anthrax because, quote, we don't know what was on those planes, the planes that had just hit the Twin Towers. Okay. And now the next slide, if you can see it, on 9/11 itself, Richard Pearl, who was a leading Project for New American Century manifesto signatory calling for the new Pearl Harbor, that was in fact 9/11, a year before 9/11 almost exactly, whose goal was to cement US global dominance. And I refer you back to Charlotte Dennett's presentation on the geopolitical context of 9/11, which is US global dominance through oil, control of oil. That Richard Pearl on 9/11 asked the same question or made the same point on mainstream television. He said, what if the plane, meaning the World Trade Center planes, was full of anthrax this morning? As detailed in Graham McQueen's book, The 9/11 Anthrax Deception, which by the way, does not at all go into the anthrax links to 9/11 itself, even though he did know about it because he had read and told me he had read and got him into it. He read my article in Op-Ed News in 2008, as early as 2008, called The Scarlet A, Anthrax Links to the Day of 9/11 itself. That is not in Graham's book, but what Graham's book does, it's very complementary to my work on the anthrax links to the day of 9/11 itself, because his work shows that from 9/11 on until we're told by the official lie that the government first learned about any possibility of anthrax, not until October 4th or 5th, that during that entire window, there was massive scare, especially in New York City, and people were raiding anti-anthrax Cipro out of their drugstores. And there were
Barbara, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, please.
Okay, I will. Okay, so anyway, I'm just letting you know that this is a very important book. So we're almost to the end. The domestic bioterrorism threat is extremely serious. The real inside perpetrators who attacked the United States Congress, 2 senators, Leahy and Daschle, who were trying to block the most egregious aspects of the Patriot Act before it was passed only a few days later, attacked them with a weapon of mass destruction, the most militarized, weaponized anthrax ever known to man at 1 trillion grams per, a trillion spores per gram, and killed 3,000 innocent civilians. These domestic terrorists are still at large, and they are free to do it again. And the government is funding, this is the last two slides, I believe. Our government is funding research right now on an anthrax coronavirus hybrid, which would be the perfect bioweapon, merging the lethality of anthrax, the high lethality of weaponized, aerosolized anthrax with the high contagion of a bioengineered coronavirus. And this is a slide that gives you the proof of that and the FOI, the documents that have been gotten out of the government that show this. And my last few slides, resources that you can follow. I mentioned my article, Scarlet A, Anthrax Links to the Day of 9/11 itself. Unfortunately, it's been taken down by our government censors who actually did the deed to begin with. But you can email me to ask for that to be sent to you by email. And that's, its information is on the screen, bshonegg@gmail.com. And be sure and have the subject line read Scarlet A. Crossing the Rubicon by Mike Rupert. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but there are chapters on Tripod 2 exercise that was on an anthrax scenario. All of the personnel for which were already in New York City on September 10th. And Graham McQueen's book, the 2001 Anthrax Deception I just mentioned. And finally, Game Over by Dr. Heiko Scherning. The English edition will be available around October 1st, pre-order on Amazon.com. And this is a mind-blowing book about even further information about Dr. Richard Tubb and Ed Meese and Philip Zelikow. So that's it. Are there any questions? How do I get out of my screen? Oh, stop share.
Yeah.
There we go.
We're slammed up against the time here. So
That's
I'm
fine.
hoping when Danny is done, maybe in the general questions, people will have an opportunity to ask you some questions.
No problem.
So right now, I'd like to describe our next speaker as the tribe's memory on major government criminal activity. In the last 40 plus years, he became the tribe's memory via litigating some of the highest profile cases in the latter part of the 20th century, including the Pentagon Papers, Iran-Contra, and Karen Silkwood. In the course of all this, Daniel Sheehan has himself become an historic figure. For close to 5 decades, his work as a federal civil rights attorney, author, public speaker, and college and law school educator has helped expose the structural sources of injustice in our country and around the world. If anyone understands the historical and legal context within which the crimes of 9/11 sit, it is Mr. Sheehan. If anyone could craft a successful case against the government for 9/11 crimes, again, it's Sheehan, which is why the Lawyers Committee is so fortunate to have him as an advisor. He's here today to talk about what it takes to win big historic cases. Welcome, Danny.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I've got 20 minutes to try to explain, how one goes about winning an historic case. And then a couple of minutes maybe when all of us can answer some questions. But the bottom line is that the number one thing you have to do in mounting one of these historic cases that are challenging some major structural source of injustice in the country is you have to pick the proper initial forum. We all know that the particular trial court in which you initiate a piece of litigation is extraordinarily important, because this is where the facts are going to get established. The legal rulings are going to be made that become the subject of appellate decisions later on. This is what's known as forum shopping. You have to pick the right forum in which to try to initiate your case to begin with. And of course, that will also determine which court of appeals is going to be overseeing the appeal from the case. And then, of course, it depends on which Supreme Court, what the makeup of the Supreme Court is at the particular time that you're contemplating initiating one of these major history changing cases. For example, to try a case, for example, in 1971, in the Federal Eastern District of New York in front of Jack Weinstein, who was appointed by Lyndon Johnson, who taught constitutional law at NYU and was a federal judge in the Eastern District, such as we initiated in the Courtright case, Courtright versus Reeser. It was the case in which we got the federal courts to stop the Defense Department from shipping the entire first U.S. Army regimental band to frontline combat units in Vietnam as punishment for them having taken out a full-page ad in the New York Times with their name, rank, and serial numbers challenging the Vietnam War. To bring a case like that in 1971 in front of Jack Weinstein in the Eastern District of New York is of a very different kind than, for example, bringing a case in the federal district court in North Dakota in 2018. For example, in front of Judge Daniel Hovland, appointed by George W. Bush, handpicked by the Federalist Society. And so that you have to know where, if you have control over initiating a case in a particular area, whether you're initiating a piece of litigation or whether you're planning to engage in a particular action that might result in people being criminally arrested and prosecuted. You have to pick your forum to make sure you have the best possible forum for litigating that particular issue at the trial court level. As I mentioned, it also relates, of course, to the Court of Appeals that's going to be looking at this. It's much better to have certain courts of appeals be reviewing your case than others. For example, the 10th and 11th circuits, for example, are notoriously reactionary and are opposed to almost any type of public interest litigation that might be mounted. And they'll go to great lengths to try to distort the facts that they believe were determined by the trial court. They'll misinterpret the law, et cetera. And of course, the Supreme Court is all important. That, for example, when we did the Courtright versus Reeser case back in 1971 in the Federal District Court in the Eastern District of New York, the Supreme Court at that time had William Douglas and William Brennan and Potter Stewart and Hugo Black and John Harlan, Byron Whizzer White, Thurgood Marshall, and Harry Blackmun, in addition to Berger, who was the Supreme Court Justice at the time. Now that's completely different than bringing an action, for example, in 2018, when you got Justice Roberts and Samuel Alito and Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch. So that the decision that you're going to make about initiating a case that is going to have major historical impact is determined. You have to determine where and when you're going to bring this particular type of litigation. Number two, even though there's some overlap between the makeup of the courts at a particular point in time and the time period, the kind of cultural time period that you're in, even setting aside the kind of overlap there, one has to acknowledge that there's a fundamental difference in the cultural time period between, for example, 1968, when I was one of the co-founders with Mark Green of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review at Harvard Law School, and we started initiating particular major impact cases, like the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources that went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. That cultural period from 1968 up to 1992, when at the end of the Reagan-Bush administrations, that time period was very different, with the baby boomer kind of generated assault on the kind of injustices of the structures of our country. It was very, very different than the 1992 to 2022 period that we're in now. This 20-year period is quite different because this period was initiated by the dissolution of the Soviet Union. When President Gorbachev in the Soviet Union signed the edict releasing all of the republics of the Soviet Union and withdrew from the Cold War, this was an extraordinarily important beginning of a period in which the most reactionary elements in the Republican Party surged to the forefront. And of course, that was in the administration of George H.W. Bush in December of 1991. And what you'll recall that right in the very first week after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union sort of withdrawing from the long 75-year-old Cold War with the West, threatening various forms of socialism being supported throughout the world. When he stepped out of that field, the reactionaries, the most reactionary elements of the Republican Party, basically snapped back right to the same robber baron ethos that was in the forefront of their policies, et cetera, back before October of 1917. So that you got this incredible robber baron type of mentality that began to dominate the Republican Party. And the bottom line is that the Democratic Party, which had prior to that time, during the period between 1932 and 1992, had basically been at least some sort of a soporific, to counter the kind of ravaging reactionary Republican Party greed and avarice and imperialism. The Democratic Party would come forward with health insurance, unemployment insurance, supported unions, et cetera. But what happened is that when the immediately after the withdrawal on December 31st of 1991 of the Soviet Union from the field, that the very next Monday morning in the George H.W. Bush administration, the Defense Department, remember, and Dick Cheney was his Secretary of Defense. Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Fife and Scooter Libby and the rest of them all got together in the West Wing of the White House, and they began crafting the 1992 United States Defense Department policy planning guidance document. And they were going to completely alter the entire kind of planning structures of the United States Defense Department. And they set forth this draft opinion in April of 1992. And in that, they only made it available to certain members of the cabinet and certain people over in the Pentagon. But this particular document, I ended up getting a copy of this, from the head of peace studies at the University of New Hampshire, sent it to us. And the bottom line is, this was calling for the resistance to the efforts to reduce the military budget in the United States that might have been expected at the end of the Cold War, since the massive, $500 to $700 billion a year military budget had been justified all during this time because ostensibly the Soviet Union was planning to take over the world, they said. And so that we had to mount this massive military budget that required us to postpone other democratic institutional programs, et cetera. So the bottom line is that the Bush administration, Bush Sr., viewed themselves as threatened by having this defense budget cut. And so what they did is they put forth this new policy of increasing the military budget in their own words, to establish full spectrum dominance over the planet. And the purpose of this was, in their own words, was to maintain their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by the United States and their corporations. That was their objective, quite starkly put in this classified document. So that this ethos that immediately began to pervade the Republican Party, as we've seen during this period between 1992 and 2022, caused the Republican Party to go farther and farther and farther to the right, so that they've become openly fascistic, authoritarian, even to the point of nominating a person like Donald Trump to be their standard bearer. And the problem was that the Democratic Party, rather than respond by standing fast and supporting the basic social democratic principles of the Roosevelt administration and the New Deal and social democracy, they began to actually drift to the right very significantly. This was the project for a new, whereas the Republicans were pushing the project for a new American century, what the Democrats began to do was to put forth for the Democratic Leadership Conference Richard Gebhardt and Sam Nunn and Bill Clinton and Al Gore and Hillary Clinton and these people, they began to put forth a new, more moderate Democratic Party that was actually withdrawing a lot of their support for the social safety nets, et cetera, in the United States that they had theretofore been proselytizing on behalf of as some way of staving off the pressure for potential socialist reforms in the American government. And so they abandoned that entire task, and you began to get this neoliberal response to the reactionary drift of the Republican Party. So this entire era, this cultural era from 1992 to 2022 was much different than the previous era between 1968 and 1992, in which we did a lot of our major litigation. The Pentagon Papers case, the Wounded Knee case, a lot of these cases, so that we have to be cognizant of the fact that this new era that began immediately after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union in basically at the first week of 1992 was focused on gaining access, establishing full spectrum dominance, and maintaining or securing access to the strategic raw materials in the planet for the benefit, the unilateral benefit of the United States. Now, it's important to understand that the 9/11 event was the second most important cultural event of this entire period following the actual official end of the Cold War, which established the entire kind of ideological drift to the right that I've just made reference to. But the 9/11 event itself, you've got to remember that when the Soviet Union withdrew from this field of struggle, and the Democrats drifted right over with them, the whole objective of the George W. Bush administration, with Dick Cheney as the vice president, you need to remember, they're the ones that initiated the original invasion of the Middle Eastern oil fields. That's exactly what that was. All of this hoopla about Saddam Hussein, threatening the Kuwait, and I won't go into great detail about this, but you probably understand it, that George W. Bush, when they realized that the Soviet Union was withdrawing from the longtime Cold War, they decided that it was the opportune moment to invade the Middle Eastern oil fields, as Charlotte has been pointing out. And what they did is George Bush Sr. actually sent a handwritten memo through April Gillespie, who was the ambassador to Iraq, sent the memo to Saddam Hussein, asserting that, look, we realize that you're having some conflict with Kuwait on your southern border, and you believe that they're slant drilling under your borders and taking your oil from Iraq. But I would like to have you solve that peacefully if you can. But if you can't, I want you to realize that I would not personally view that as contrary to the long-term best interests of the United States. And of course, that was the green light for Saddam Hussein to start assembling 10,000 military troops along the southern border of Iraq with the northern border of Kuwait. And at that point, Dick Cheney actually invited to come over to the White House the ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Prince Bandar, and actually showed him live NSA satellite video pictures of the assembling of those military troops on the border. And he said that, lied and said, we have intelligence information like this, not only that Saddam Hussein is preparing to invade and occupy the Kuwaiti territory, but we know that when he gets done doing that, he's going to be invading Saudi Arabia and trying to overthrow the House of Saud. Because you know that the House of Saud is very unpopular, with all their rich princes, rolling around the world and losing millions of dollars at Monte Carlo on the throw of a dice and driving big, massive, wealthy cars. So the bottom line is, he said that what they did is caused, and he said, look, if in fact we're right, and Saddam Hussein is going to invade and occupy Kuwait, we want you to invite us. This is Dick Cheney now saying, I want you to invite me over to meet with King Fahd and Crown Prince Abdullah and have a meeting with him because we're interested in potentially invoking a secret 1972 treaty that was established by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, literally on their way back from China, with opening up China. When they were on their way back on the SR-71 Blackbird, they actually stopped in Saudi Arabia and met with King Faisal at that time and established a new secret treaty extending the 60-year-old unique and exclusive lease agreement that the 7 major Western oil corporations have with the Saudi oil fields. And they also stopped on the way back and met with the Shah of Iran and established a similar deal with them, pursuant to which they agreed to allow those two countries to raise the price of oil, and that they would be getting more and more a larger share of the price at the pump. But they had to agree to utilize that additional money to buy a wax over the horizon radar, and most especially that they had to in Saudi Arabia, they had to agree to use some of the money to dredge out the major harbors to be able to take American warships. And they had to build major military bases and landing space to bring in U.S. military troops. All of this was being planned. Now, all of this was taking place right in 1991. And what happened is when of course, the Saddam Hussein, as anticipated, went into Kuwait and occupied them, Dick Cheney, pursuant to his agreement, flew over and went to Saudi Arabia, met with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah, and invoked the old contract, the old treaty, to get them to invite us to come on in. And that's when, in fact, the Bush administration senior started gathering the army of the willing, to support their military invasion of the Middle Eastern oil field. It's extremely important to remember that this happened in 1991. And it was that military invasion that triggered everything, because what happened is when Dick Cheney was having the meetings there in June of 1991 with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah, the chief of security of the House of Saud, Turki bin Faisal, found out about this, obviously knew about this was happening, and he went and met with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah and said, don't do this. Do not invite the infidels into the Holy Land because they won't leave. If you invite them in, they won't leave. I have an alternative to you. And what he did is he met the next morning with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah, and he came along with Khalil Mahfouz, who was the head of the Royal Saudi Family Bank, and with Mohammed Baroum, who was the head of the richest family there. They said, we have an alternative. Don't invite the infidels in to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. We have an alternative. And they turned and opened the door, and in comes Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden being the best boyhood friend of Turki bin Faisal, the head of security for the House of Saud, and said, here's Osama bin Laden. He's got 10,000 battle-hardened Mujahideen troops up sitting in the Khyber Pass, ready to kick the butt of Saddam Hussein and drive him back up out of Kuwait. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. We have an alternative here. And Osama bin Laden said, look, you can't allow the infidels into the Holy Land because they won't leave. He said it again. So, but the problem was that Dick Cheney was still there at the palace, and he knew about the second meeting. So he went back in and had an additional meeting with King Faoud and Crown Prince Abdullah. And what he said is, look, I have a sweetener for this deal. If you will allow us, invite us in under the 1972 treaty, that was secretly negotiated by Richard Nixon and Kissinger, what we'll do, we'll not only come in here and drive Saddam Hussein out, but we will protect you, we'll stay and protect you even against your own citizens. Because you know that the kind of radical Islamic people really hate the House of Saud and all of your crown princes whoring throughout Europe, etc. So if you'll invite us in, we'll come in and we'll stay and we'll protect you. And that's exactly what happened. So George Bush Sr. and the people, they gathered the army of the willing. They went in and unilaterally invaded and occupied the Middle Eastern oil fields, and they set up a no-fly zone with Iraq and saying, we're not going to oust Saddam Hussein from power. We're going to leave him in power, but we're going to set up a no-fly zone, which requires 250,000 full-time U.S. military personnel to be on the ground monitoring and running that operation. That's what happened. Okay. Now it's really critical to understand that that was what the plan was of the whole Bush administration. And the Bush administration was planning to put in a pipeline from the Caspian Sea, which Charlotte has referred to. But the bottom line is that something suddenly happened to Bush Sr. When he ran for his second term. He was ousted from power, as you remember. Not because Bill Clinton and the neoliberals had succeeded in making a much more moderate pitch to the American voters. Because you remember the 1992 election in November, Bill Clinton only got 43% of the popular vote. The answer was Ross Perot. Ross Perot ran. Now, I've been accused, quite justifiably, I might add now, of having been involved in helping to participate in talking Ross Perot into running against him. That was one of the reasons that they said we were engaged in political activity at the Christic Institute. But the bottom line is Ross Perot ran as a third-party candidate. He took 19% of the popular vote away from George Bush. George Bush ended up losing. He only got 38% of the popular vote to the 42% actually of Bill Clinton. And so Clinton came in. So there was that whole hiatus with the neoliberal administration of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Al Gore, et cetera. But when they got out in the year 2000 now, and remember, and it wasn't George W. Bush that really ran that next administration. It was Dick Cheney, the very same people that were in charge of drafting the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. The same people that set up the Project for a New American Century, the same people that were bent on world domination, to full spectrum dominance of the world. And they then were looking for a whole reason to go in and completely oust Saddam Hussein and to solidify their hold in the Middle Eastern oil fields. And that was the call for the new Pearl Harbor. Now, this reality, some details of which have been put together here, that Charlotte has talked to you about, is what is the most important fact that was going on at that time. And that reality has to be conveyed. It has to be conveyed. So this leads us to the number one most important thing to do, besides having the proper venue that you pick for your case, is you have to have a clear understanding of what the bottom line facts are that you're going to be asserting right from the very beginning of your case. You have to know what the bottom line of your complaint is or your defense is. You've got to have full-scale professional investigation undertaken. You have to develop sources inside the other camp in order to get at inside information. That we've always been successful in doing this at the Christic Institute. And that's why that we've been involved in so many of these cases. Not only from the Watergate case and the Dan Ellsberg case and the Karen Silkwood case, the Iran-Contra case, the Greensboro case down in North Carolina, all these different cases that we've done all the way up until the more recent ones against the Lakota Access Pipeline, where we defended Chase Iron Eyes of the Lakota Nation, that we dug in to discover the existence of Tiger Swan Private Military Corporation and their connections to the Middle Eastern policies. And we stuck them right in the face of the judge in that case. And so they ended up dismissing all the charges against Chase Iron Eyes. This capacity to have full-scale professional investigation and to get access to the kind of investigators who are former military intelligence investigators, criminal investigators, et cetera, is crucial. It was crucial. It's been crucial to the success of the Christic Institute and later the Romero Institute. Because as you remember, George Bush Sr., after having lost the 1992 election on Christmas Eve, not only pardoned all of the major people that we had accused in the Iran-Contra case, in our Federal Criminal Racketeering Act complaint of being involved in smuggling weapons to the Contras in violation of the Bold Amendment, but he also at that exact time ordered the revocation of the 501c3 tax-exempt charter for the Christic Institute. We fortunately were taken on by the Romero Institute that adopted us and elected us to be their officials. And so we continued as the Romero Institute, which is what we are now. But we still have this capacity of access to these, at F. Lee Bailey's office, when I was there during the Watergate burglary case, and we represented James McCord, who, as you'll recall, we got to blow the whistle on Richard Nixon. He wrote the letter to Judge Sirica, blowing the whistle on the plumbers in Richard Nixon, et cetera. And so we had access to a stable of 40 Class A licensed private investigators at that firm. And I got the support of some of them when I left and went to Jesuit headquarters. And so we have access to those people who have got all kinds of contacts. Okay, and William Johnstone Taylor, who was the president of the Florida Association of Professional Private Investigators, the co-founder of the former Federal Investigators Association, has an alliance of people all over the world, and was very instrumental in helping us get this information about Turkey bin Faisal. So this kind of capacity you have to have in order to do these sort of massive historical cases, and so that's and that has not been done yet. You know that about this case. You're hearing all the people say maybe this, maybe the other people were involved. In all of the cases, the litigations that you've done so far have been attempting to search out and try to get information which is in the hands of the government, which of course they're refusing to give you. They're refusing to give you your FOIA stuff. They're refusing to give you the access to the grand jury. That all of those appointed judges are not going to give you the information. You got to get the information, just as you have with regard to the detonations here. But you know that's circumstantial evidence. You still aren't asserting who did it, exactly how they did it. You know, you've got to do that at the very beginning of a case, and this has not been done yet. That's the key thing that you have to get solved here. Now, there's other important things that I'll close with. These is number two, you have to have a very strong administrative staff. You know, Sarah Nelson, who's been our executive director ever since the Karen Silkwood case, all the way back then, who was the National Labor Secretary for the National Organization for Women, is just a masterful administrator. We had a staff at Christic Institute of 55 full-time staff working for us there. As the Romero Institute, we have 25 now full-time paid staff. Sarah administers all of them. Thirdly, you have to have a very sophisticated development department to be able to raise funds. You can't just, have a bake sale or, with all due respect, have a meeting like this, where you have a total of 190 people on it, and you're pleading with them to send money to you. That isn't going to support the kind of staff that you need to have. You have to have a sophisticated fundraising process and grassroots organizing. You've got to have that. Now, you've got to have this organizing team to be able to bring in allies, major allies in the public interest field. In the Karen Silkwood case, we had the unions, the Oil Chemical Atomic Workers Union, we had ACLU, we had the National Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, we had the Lawyers for Public Justice, we had the environmental community, we had the anti-nuclear war community, we had the anti-nuclear power community. We organized all these people. That takes staff, that takes contacts. You've got to have a sophisticated organizing department in addition to your development department. Your development department is able to raise the funds for those people. Now, we started out at the Christic Institute, all of us making $9,000 a year, and we all lived together in a former convent out at the Franciscan Monastery grounds in Washington, D.C. So there was an awful lot of 60s stuff going on with us. But you have to put together a team, including a team of attorneys. I mean, we've had the thing here where the MIC has been functioning for the most part, with basically by himself, with this thing without much of a big staff. People are volunteering kind of part-time with this. That isn't going to work in a thing like this. You're talking about challenging the major bulwark of the national American security state with doing an inside job here. And you're trying to do it both on a shoestring and with good-hearted, wonderful amateurs, but not people who are professional full-time, except for Mick and a couple others. That you have to have a full team. You have to have trial lawyers. You have to have researchers. You have to have brief writers. You have to have appellate attorneys in there, so planning on what you're going to be arguing at the trial court level, because what the Court of Appeals is going to do to you. You have to have public speakers, and you have to have depositions taken. I mean, really aggressive, powerful depositions. You have to have a grand inquisitor who is basically able to pound away at these people in the depositions and get the documents, get the stuff. But you can't get it going through the Freedom of Information Act. As you know, there's 23 different exceptions, and they'll find one. If they lie all the time and nobody ever does a thing to them, they always tell you right at the very beginning, oh, we don't have a single thing for you. I got Father Daniel Ellsberg's files, and when I was at Jesuit headquarters, and he was on the FBI most wanted list for like almost a decade.
Danny, you're running out of time.
Okay, well, that's the end of it. So anyway, you have to have public education. You have to have a creative dialectic going on at all times between what you are asserting to be true and this inductive process of gathering more and more investigative information. There's a way to go about doing these cases, and I know that Mick is now talking about potentially initiating this kind of cover-up litigation, which I think we've talked about this, which I think is a very promising prospect here. But you have to do this, and so that I'm saying is you have to put together this kind of a major organization and do the kind of fundraising, which requires the bottom line. You got to tell people what you're telling them. Say, well, I don't know if it was the actual hijackers, whether they were really there or not, or whether it was totally fake. Maybe they're all still alive somewhere. Maybe it was the Saudis, maybe it was, you can't do that. You cannot mount a litigation like that without knowing what you're talking about. And so that's what I'm saying. And this isn't being critical, it's being constructive. Because if you're thinking about what the next phase of this is going to be, that you have to understand what is necessary to get to the bottom of what's happened here and stick it on them. And in closing, I'll say another thing is, until such time as we sort of push out these neoliberal members of the Democratic Party and replace them with true progressive people, like AOC and other people in major leadership positions in the party, the Democratic Party isn't going to be supportive of us in doing this. They're all still getting their major financing from the major corporations, and they're not going to accept us. Okay, so there has to be major organizing, political consciousness raising on the part of the American people, and we do it through knowing what it is that happened at 9/11 and saying it.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Danny. Mick, I guess you should start the closing comments. I don't know if we can take a few questions from people, but I think that Mick should take over right now and start the closing comments unless and
Okay.
until.
There is one interesting question here. If
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
someone who joined, Kevin O'Neill, joined 2.5 hours in, but has some interesting questions that maybe somebody would like to answer. What is your opinion on the strategy the LC911 team has deployed, and please describe your view of likely outcomes from it? Third, what else can the LC911 do to apply pressure to get a jury seated?
That sounds like a question for Danny, but I think he may have just answered it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a hard message, but it's a heartfelt message, and it's one that is completely supportive of getting out of the situation that you find yourself in right now and have been in for some time. We have to overcome that.
Appreciate that. Do you have another question for us, Ellen?
Could I ask a question, Barb?
Well, yeah, in just a moment, Barb.
No, go
We'll do the
ahead,
next one from
Barb. The
Ellen.
rest of it, I recommend that the panelists before leaving take a look at all the questions and see what you
Yeah, I'm going to do that when we stop, but I'll go to Barb, and then if our panelists have immediate questions for each other, we can do that. And then before we close, I'll go to the Q&A list and see if we can mine some other good questions. So Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Danny. Boy, we hear your message loud and clear, and I've heard it for literally almost 20 years now from you, including in your office in Santa Cruz. The dilemma that I see that we face is I believe we're in a catch-22. When it comes to 9/11, I hear that you want us to say what happened, but we don't know. And we believe that we will find out through the FOIA process. And Mick has actually had some victories here, and we expect to win our FOI lawsuit against FEMA and NIST coming up in the near future. So I see this as a real chicken and egg problem. I mean, it was one of my problems with going to the grand jury, any grand jury in the first place. And that is that grand juries, as Richard Gage said correctly, are just people like us. But they're going to start out doing absolutely nothing. So what is the sense of sending, of giving basically 23 or however many there are, probably completely ignorant and naive people, the job of trying to find out what happened? We're in a catch-22. We're asking the grand jury to use their subpoena power to find out what happened and let us know, except, everything they do is secret unless they're on indictments. We're in a horrible catch-22 because we don't know what happened. We're trying to find out through the discovery process.
Barb, can you turn on your camera?
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I would say that one of the things you really need to get perfectly clear here is that the government institutions are not going to tell you. Period. I mean, in case that's a great revelation here to you, they're not going to tell you. Whether you're going through the Freedom of Information Act, you're trying to get the attorney, U.S. attorney in charge of the grand jury, they're not going to tell you. So you have to undertake a different method of finding out this stuff, just like you've done with the architects and engineers, finding out about some of the scientific details. You have to find out the political details about this thing. You have to figure out how this thing was put together and done. You're going to have to get some people inside those political structures, and that's going to require bringing on really full-scale professional investigators that have got contacts like that in order to do that. So that I just want to be as clear as I can, is that you are not going to get any of the government structures to tell you what it is that happened here, and so that you keep on wasting your time trying to get that, but they aren't going to tell you, and it's just going to be more and more frustrating all the time.
So Christina, let me add an editorial comment on Danny's answer, then we'll go to the next. So the one exception I would take to what Danny just said, and generally speaking, I would probably just say amen to the advice he's been giving us. But the one exception is the FOIA case we're doing in the district court in DC with Judge Sullivan is going according to the law, according to the procedure. We have established by depositions, which we were allowed to do, thankfully, cover up by 2 agencies. That may lead us to some additional hard evidence on the demolition. Now, the question is, can we get to the point of getting the power to do depositions through another vehicle on other issues to get to the bottom line Danny's talking about, which is, who's responsible, how did it happen, the full story. And I think the cover-up case I'm talking about, the Jennifer Harbright type of case, may be the answer, but we still need the resources Danny is describing, which is why we're asking you to think seriously about what you can afford to give, particularly the big donors out there listening, because if you're going to do it ever, this is probably the time to do it. So I'll stop there. And Christina, I think you had something, and I've got a couple other questions from our audience.
Yeah, I have a bottom line question, Danny. I mean, I know exactly the type of people that we would need to hire to do this. What kind of budget are realistically would we be looking at to get these insiders? And because they're not going to do it for nothing, because they're putting their butts on the line to get the documentation that we need.
Well, the Karen Silkwood case cost us $4 million over the period of time. The Iran Contra case cost $6 million.
Wow.
I know that's stunning, but you have to get it over a period of time. The litigation is going to take time, but you have to let everybody know that there's a there there. Once they know there's a there, you can keep on getting people supporting you. But the people right now are all can't quite figure out exactly what it is that's being asserted, and you can't really get big funders. Most of the big funders are big funders because they know how to make decisions based on concrete knowledge, and they don't have the knowledge yet to put in the big money, and so that we have to do some more work to figure out a explicit, agreed upon operating thesis as to what's happened here. and then get the investigators in the field to go dig into that, willing to amend it a little bit, but they've got to know what they're after here and what they believe happened. I mean, they're a little long in the tooth, some of these investigators that we've worked with for a while, but they're perfectly capable of a second wind. You know, these people, they know that there's a rat in the woodpile here on 9/11. And they're just like, you know, that Mr. Lawyer was talking about. They just can't quite come to grips with it. They can't conceive of anything of this scale actually having happened. I can tell you, our investigators have a concept of this. They've crossed the Rubicon. They know what the government is capable of.
Well, would they be willing to meet with the lawyers committee and talk to us about their ideas?
Well, they'd be willing to meet with me, and I'm willing to meet with the lawyers committee. You know,
Okay.
these people are all spread out. I have to really figure out how many of them are still operational, you know, and what kind of funds it takes, et cetera. You know, but you know, that's why I'm
That would be good to know. I mean, that would be good to know, like initial phase, if you could reach out to some of these people and they'll say, okay, I'll do X for this amount and so on, we can actually start doing something real.
Yeah, you know, I think
in the investigation department outside of the FOIA stuff that we're getting traction on and do have some successes.
Right. I think, Mick, you're right. I think this Harbury theory of this, we have to dig into those precedents and see how they'll hold up, you know, with any other course. But it's a clear pathway that we're talking about. And the cover up is a very well understood process on the part of our investigators. And they know that the cover up is going to continue as long as you're just asking, you know, government institutions by definition. If you know there's a cover up and you're asking government institutions that are involved in the cover up to give you the information, they're going to cover it up. So you got to go get it yourself.
Right. Well, that would be super helpful, Danny. That would be super helpful.
So, Charlotte, did you have something?
Yeah. I'm still thinking one area to pursue is New York, only because you now have a mayor there, ex-police chief. He wants to have more questions answered. That was a huge opening. I was very struck by the Salon article titled "It's Time to Come Clean on 9/11." Now, the reason I think this is important is it even goes beyond the people who were killed in the collapse. It's the people who suffered these horrible injuries. And you got some big people like Jon Stewart was there helping the first responders, but at least you've got some momentum in that direction. And of course, there are a whole lot of New Yorkers who were affected by it. Now, there may be other people who say, oh, forget the New York courts. I don't know, Danny, if you have any insights on that. I just think that it's a way to go, investigative. There are already cover-ups on records that are not being released.
Medical records, yeah.
Both medical records, and I'm not even sure what the records are that they're complaining about. These different people in New York that were covered in the Salon are, some are union people on behalf of their unions. They're not getting all the information. So if we pursue that route, we're establishing more the cover up. And meanwhile, hopefully we'll get more New Yorkers involved.
Well, you might reach out to talk to the mayor's staff, some of their new staff. Also consider potentially getting a hold of Mike Armstrong. Mike was a partner of mine at the Cahill firm when we did the Pentagon Papers case. He was the head of the Knapp Commission, the Serpico group that dug into the corruption of the New York City Police Department, et cetera. Get a hold of Vanden Heuvel. She's the daughter of Bill Vanden Heuvel, who ran the Rockefeller Commission to investigate the stuff at Attica Prison. You know, there are a number of these people that I know that would have to be involved. We've got to get some political leverage into that office. If we're going to do this in New York, we've got to get the mayor's office to put up, with what he's implying here.
I believe Eric Lawyer had his hand up. Is that correct?
Eric, did you have something? He's on mute.
There was a little hand icon.
No, not Eric?
Not Eric, okay.
Okay, no
I
problem. So let me
didn't
do
see
a
his
couple
hand.
questions
Barb,
from
can
the
you leave your
audience.
Barb, can you leave your camera on?
Oh, leave it on?
Yes.
Well, we're doing a discussion among the whole panel. So everyone who can stay on camera, please do.
Okay, you want us to stay on, okay.
Charlotte as well, and Eric, if he's willing. Because Eric, you should feel free if you hear a question out there that you want to respond to, we welcome your response as well. So I've got a couple zingers here from our audience. So before I even ask them, I have to say, we all should keep in mind that for these types of questions, we're speaking for ourselves and not for the Lawyers Committee. But they're, provocative questions. A couple from Robin Horton. One is, might it be possible that the COVID-19 debacle was timed to happen in order to take 9/11 Truth's 20th anniversary completely off the front pages? Anybody want to handle that one?
Yeah, the answer is no to that.
Okay.
That would take a long time.
That's simple enough. He addressed that for you, Danny, so I'm glad you gave that answer.
Yeah, no.
The oracle has spoken.
That's
the answer is no.
Good enough for me. And Charlotte, turn on your camera if you would.
I'm all right. I'm back. Oh,
If you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to step away just for a second.
That's okay. And then there's another one from Robin to the effect that he's wondering, this is obviously a politically oriented question, that the quote oligarchs, deep state -- ruling class unquote managed to put Trump into office so as to regain the conservative positions they enjoyed earlier by putting into place a SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, which will reliably blunt any and all of the strong evidence of a 9/11 inside job, which has been and will be presented by, for example, the Lawyers Committee. Anybody want to do that one?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
It's not just Trump. I mean, it's been 21 years and no administration, especially Bush Cheney, who were in power when it happened. And there's evidence that they were complicit. I mean, they knew about anthrax and were on anti-anthrax Cipro on 9/11 and lied about it and said that anthrax wasn't even conceived of until October 4th or 5th. It's not just the Trump administration, it's all the way through 21 years.
And I will just add to that we've had 20 some years of cover up on 9/11 through several administrations of both parties. It's not like either party has taken the bull by the horns and brought the truth out. We've seen a little movement from the current administration on some of the Saudi documents, but that's a very limited so far positive development. The next question from the audience is a big one. We've touched on it. I'll start with the answer and then invite everyone to add, and that is, was Israel involved in 9/11? We could broaden that to the whodunit question. Who do we think was involved? My first response to that is we, the Lawyers Committee, have not answered that question yet, which is part of what Danny is prompting us to do with real investigative work, which of course requires a real budget and real staff. And we're inclined to do that. The only reason we haven't done it so far isn't because we're naive about the need to do it. It's simply because we've been resource limited. So if we get the resources, we're prepared to go to the whodunit part. In the moment, I don't think we can answer it without getting all the evidence and doing the investigation that we're talking about, trying to get the funding for. And so my short answer to that question, without having finished our investigation, is there are a number of entities that cannot be ruled out. And it's probably not a question of which entity did it. It's probably a question of which combination of entities were involved. It's more like Murder on the Orient Express, if you remember the mystery from Agatha Christie, where it turned out that everybody in the train was involved in the murder. So keep that in mind as we proceed with our investigation. Does anyone want to comment on the whodunit part?
Well, I already did a little bit.
Let me say something. I think people have got to come to understand who Theodore Shackley is. Theodore Shackley was the ADDO. He was the Associate Deputy Director for Operations for George Bush when Bush was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He is the mastermind covert operations. He was the Saigon station chief that he was earlier the Laos station chief that established the contract with Vang Pao for the massive opium smuggling that was used to fund the Phoenix program over there. And he ran that entire operation. He ended up getting 2 stars on the wall at Langley for reducing the amount of opium flowing out of the Golden Triangle. He reduced it by 1/3, but he ended up establishing a monopoly control over the opium and had a percentage of it flowing to him to finance the Phoenix program. I mean, this guy is a master, and he was deep inside the Bush campaign and in the Bush vice presidency, and was closely aligned with Dick Cheney and all of these people. He was instrumental in the October surprise. You know, he's an extraordinarily important person here to really understand. This guy was the master of all of the major covert operations that are going on, and this has his fingerprints all over it.
Like what, Danny, more specifically?
Well, he is a master at instigating other people to do what it is they would be inclined to do. For example, to manipulate all the different terrorist groups that might have an interest in doing something like this, to manipulate the Saudis, to get them to play some kind of part in this. To even Shockley was in fact the head of the Israeli desk, you know, for like 4 or 5 months. That he's the guy that instigated the smuggling of the plutonium out of the Kerr-McGee facility in the Silkwood case. You know, this is the mastermind. He was clearly the smartest guy in the room whenever he got together with any of these guys, with Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney. And Cheney may have been the nastiest and most miserable guy in the room, but Shockley's the brightest guy. And that he's the kind of guy that's capable of planning something like this. And he has his fingers in every single dimension of the post Cold War and pre Cold War operations. You know,
Danny, pardon me cutting you off.
And he was trained at the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy by Reinhard Gehlen.
It sounds like a longer story, but I need to get to another couple questions.
Sure.
So, and Richard, were you waiting to say something? You're on mute, I think, if you were. Richard, did you want to get in?
No, that was my dog.
Okay, so never mind. So, but a question, we'll get back to Charlotte in a minute. Milton Farrell from the audience. Milton asked a question I'm going to direct to Eric, and then I would probably have a follow-up question for Eric. And that question, Eric, is Milton says they need to convince, and I think when he says they, he probably means us, to convince the entire U.S. cadre of firemen who know how to raise money and the support of the people. The legal channels have not been successful. Why not another approach? They, I think in this case, meaning the wrongdoers, violate the U.S. code and the rules of law at will, and they stand there and lie in your face. How do you deal with that successfully? I think the gist of that question, Eric, is there a role for, you know, firefighters to get involved, maybe in partnership with groups like us?
And I'd say absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, a little more volume.
Yeah. I got this new microphone from Richard. I got to speak into it. So yes. So when I first came into this, just briefly, I was connected to insiders really quickly. And I think I would say it was God or divine plan to help protect me. So they helped me understand what was happening, but they said firefighters are actually going to be the one group on the planet that can help people open to this because it's they're most trusted and they were the most impacted on 9/11. So I've had a lot of outside confirmations saying it's the firefighters that are going to do this. Chris Joya talks about that. It's really going to be the firefighters. So yes. And we're just in the last few days, there's energy that enough for, I think, because of COVID and all the other things that have ruined so many careers in the fire service too, that they're willing to speak. And I've never seen this before. So I'd say yes. And I'm willing to talk with you guys how that looks. But right now, Paul, you know, he's one that kind of leading the request of the firefighters right now. And we'll just see what happens. I think in a few days or weeks, there's something that we could explore there.
I appreciate that. You know, Danny had raised a point about making partnerships like he did in his other battles with other organizations, nonprofits, and movements. We obviously need to do that. Firefighters are a natural alliance here, and they might help us broaden to other nonprofits who've been sitting this out way too long. So we'll talk more about that. One specific question for you, Eric, and then I'll get back to Charlotte, and then we'll see where we have left on the list. I remember one of the incidents that happened during the attacks that I guess impacted me was the firefighter, and Richard always has to remind me of his name, who was Oriole Palmer, I guess. He was up in higher floors of one of the towers, and he reported he only saw a few fires on a few floors and thought they could knock him down with a few lines. And shortly thereafter, and very shortly thereafter, that building collapsed, as I recall.
Yes.
And to me, as a lawyer who deals with cases where you have to put a pattern of circumstantial evidence together, and timing usually turns out to be important in sequence of events, I was concerned that, that was not a coincidence in time, those two events, that someone was waiting to hit the detonation. And when he gave that report, he was threatening to basically expose the fact that fires weren't going to be capable of bringing these buildings down. And before he could go further and knocking out those fires, the building did come down. Have you given that any thought?
Yeah, and I've talked to some of those insiders about the very thing. And that's our understanding too. He basically made a, forget 478, 79. He made it to the seat of the fire is what we call it. And he reported 2 isolated pockets of fire at that point, which you see the outside videos, it matches kind of what he was saying. And he said he just needed a couple 2.5-inch lines, which are large fire hose lines, but he needed those guys to take elevator banks to get there. He identified what banks they could take. And they were, in less than 1 minute later, the building exploded. So that basically the intelligence guy that I worked with said that was, how would I say this? He had worked with these kinds of operations before, and he's now retired trying to help people who are exposing them. But he said that's probably when they realized we've got to bring it down, because once you have a building where the fires are out, you can't really justify it coming down like that, except for Tower 7. And that had the same problem. He mentioned that with Tower 7. And his theory, which I kind of, align with, was he thinks that plane headed, that crash in Pennsylvania was headed for Tower 7. And then when it didn't hit, they're like, oh crap, how do we justify this thing coming down when all the others didn't? So, yeah, that's my opinion, and that's his opinion. And do I have fact? No, but.
Well, no, I was just asking your thoughts in the moment.
Yeah.
So Charlotte, did you have something? You've been patient.
No, forget
No,
it.
never mind.
So we have 4 minutes left.
Well, we have more questions, but does anyone on the panel have something they feel urgent to say before we close?
Well, yeah, I'll come back.
Okay.
I'll come back briefly, Barb.
No, I mean, I was just reminded recently that the neocons, 2 or 3 of them, I think it was Wolfowitz, Feith, I can't remember the next one. They're dual citizens, U.S. Israel. That's something to consider. Just want to say.
So
there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle here, Charlotte, and we need to put them together, like Danny says. It is on our radar screen. We can get the resources to do it. Barb?
Yeah, I just like to thank everybody for coming, and please don't be discouraged. Just because we need, $50 million doesn't mean we don't have the money now.
No problem.
We need anything you can help us with now. We really do. So again, lcfor911.org. We appreciate any contribution you can make there at the donate button. And I would like to just announce that for anyone who would like to watch tonight on the Other Side of Midnight online radio show with host Richard Hoagland, although his house was hit by lightning this morning, so it may be his former producer, Kim Thea, who will be the host tonight. We don't know yet, but it will go forward. So Mick and Charlotte and Richard and myself will be on for the first 2 hours tonight of the Other Side of Midnight radio show that reaches over 150 countries, has a huge audience. And the way you can watch tonight, it's at 9 o'clock midnight Eastern, and you go to theothersideofmidnight.com, click on tonight's show, and then click to listen right after midnight Eastern.
I too want to thank the attendees for coming, for caring, and for your ongoing support. We really appreciate you very much, and you do have our deepest gratitude. And you are the wind in the sail of our efforts. You're the ones who give us strength and who inspire us to keep going. And we look forward to staying in touch with you and to keeping you posted on our progress. And we are excited, even though Danny wants us to hire these very expensive people, which of course we will do that.
Eventually we'll get there.
I have every confidence we will.
We're
But
never going to give
so
up.
excited about what we're poised to achieve in the near future with what we already have going on.
Right.
But
So-
it starts today with each one of you who care about the 9/11 truth, who've seen the impassioned and carefully thought out work that's being done here at the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. It's up to each one of you to make it happen. We have a $10,000 goal today. We are more than halfway there. Will you get us the rest of the way there? I'm just guessing, and I'm hoping that there are at least 3 of you who can write a check right now for $1,000. And the address to send it to is on the Lawyers Committee website, lc4for911.org. I'm guessing also that there's 6 of you who could write a check for $500. This would mean a lot. And I'm also guessing that there are 10 of you who could write a check for $100 or $200. That's what makes it work. That's what will get us a real investigation and toward that. We'll talk about the $4 to $6 million that we need as we roll into the next year. We got to get through this year with some major decisions to be made, which may very well include a jump toward the Supreme Court and or New York with additional lawsuits as Mick outlined. Christina?
We're at the end of our time.
Oh, well, I'm just getting
David
started.
Ray Griffin.
Hi, David.
Hi, David.
Thank
We love
you for
you.
watching. We love you.
We love you, David.
So I think we're good, folks. Thank you again for attending, and we'll say goodbye for now. I will want you to watch our webpage, not only for new developments, but I will be offering a regular Zoom live interaction to do some more Q&A in the next week or two. So if you didn't get your question answered and you really want to, watch our webpage, you'll get another